With her last $1.08 clutched in trembling fingers and a foreclosure notice crumpled in her pocket, Sarah Reynolds watched in stunned silence as the contractor's crowbar pried loose the rotting floorboards of the abandoned barn she had desperately purchased at a county auction. Beneath the decaying wood lay the entrance to a narrow tunnel, its walls reinforced with century-old timber supports leading to a hidden cave containing 3 wooden chests filled with gold coins, silver bars, and faded banknotes estimated at $3 million, the legendary lost treasure of notorious outlaw Cole Blackwood. But what began as a desperate last stand against financial ruin would soon reveal a stunning truth. The gold wasn't stolen from innocent citizens, but from Al Capone's bootlegging empire. Among the treasures lay a leather-bound journal with entries in a peculiar cipher and letters bearing the initials JEH, evidence that America's most wanted outlaw may have been the nation's most secret hero. As government officials and historians descended upon her property, Sarah would discover that her connection to this treasure was no accident, and that the true legacy of Cole Blackwood would forever change American history. Before we jump back in, tell us where you are tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The relentless summer heat poured through the broken windows of the dilapidated barn as Sarah Reynolds surveyed the damage assessment spread across what had once been a sturdy workbench. At 38, the deepening worry lines etched around her eyes and the premature silver threading through her once chocolate brown hair told the story of a woman who had weathered an impossible year. Despite the exhaustion that seemed to hang from her shoulders like a physical weight, her eyes still flickered with a quiet determination that had become her only constant companion. "The entire roof needs to be replaced," she said, tracing her finger along the red-marked areas of the inspector's report. "And the foundation has shifted significantly on the north side." Jack Harrison, the contractor she had somehow convinced to look at the property, despite her obvious financial constraints, leaned against the weathered wall and studied the building plans. At 49, his sun-weathered face carried the deep lines earned from decades of renovating historic structures throughout Blackwood County. The former Navy SEAL had found a second career in historic restoration, drawn to the precision and respect for tradition the work required. "Supporting beams in the loft are completely compromised," he said, his voice rough from years of working around construction dust. "Renovation costs on a structure this old, especially with the water damage from years of neglect, will be astronomical." "Are you absolutely certain about this, Sarah?" The local radio station played quietly from Jack's portable radio, the announcer's voice tight with excitement. "Coming up next, Blackwood's 150th Frontier Day celebration preparations are underway. Mayor Wilson promises this year's Prohibition-era reenactment will be the largest in county history." The once sturdy interior of the Blackwood barn, with its now warped plank flooring and damaged timber framing, had witnessed over a century of frontier history. A vintage gun rack missing several pegs and covered in dust had once proudly displayed riding equipment during the barn's glory days. Today, it stood as a silent witness to Sarah's desperate gamble, a last-ditch effort to rebuild her life after losing everything. Rebecca Monroe, Sarah's closest friend since high school, entered from the back storeroom dust-coating her practical canvas work pants. At 37, her practical ponytail and efficient movements spoke of someone who had learned to navigate life's challenges with pragmatic determination. Her background in local history and journalism had given her an encyclopedic knowledge of Blackwood County's colorful past. "Electrical system is completely shot," she reported, accepting the bottle of water Sarah handed her. "And there's significant termite damage in the eastern corner. Those antique farm tools you were excited about might already be too damaged to salvage." Sarah's expression darkened. The vintage farming equipment, with its hand-forged tools and wooden handles, had been one of the features that convinced her to bid on the property despite her precarious finances. Now it was just one more piece of her fragile plan threatened by the structure's extensive deterioration. Sarah moved to the front window, staring out at the quiet back road of Blackwood, a small town that had once thrived during the Prohibition era, but now struggled to maintain its historic properties against the pull of interstate development and big box stores. The Blackwood barn had been deteriorating long before she discovered it 6 years vacant after the death of its elderly owner. The auction price had been remarkably low, reflecting both the property's condition and the limited number of buyers willing to take on such a massive renovation project. The final foreclosure notice from her mortgage company had arrived 3 weeks ago, 30 days to vacate. After her bitter divorce 2 years earlier, the discovery of her ex-husband's hidden debts and the legal battle that followed had decimated her once comfortable life. The modest settlement that should have provided temporary security had instead gone to creditors, leaving Sarah with nothing but mounting bills and a shattered sense of stability. The Johnson property sold last week, Rebecca said quietly, sweeping dust from a corner shelf. That corporate development group bought it. They're clearing the land next month. Jack's jaw tightened. Vultures have been picking at every historic property in the county, tearing down a century of history for outlet stores and parking lots. The situation was painfully familiar in Blackwood. Historic structures were disappearing one by one, replaced by generic commercial establishments that erased the town's unique architectural character. The Blackwood Barn was one of the last untouched 19th century structures, remaining a distinction that brought more historical significance than financial value. Westridge Development called again this morning, Rebecca added reluctantly. Offered to take the property off your hands before the repair costs make it worthless, as they put it. 30 cents on the dollar, I'm guessing, Shura said bitterly. Just enough to cover what I paid at auction, but not a penny for the historical significance or potential. The unspoken reality hung in the air. The Blackwood Barn wasn't just a desperate investment. It had become Sarah's entire future plan. Every remaining dollar from her divorce settlement, after the creditors took their share, had gone into purchasing this crumbling structure. If she lost the barn, she lost everything: her investment, her housing plans, and her last chance of financial recovery for herself and her 11-year-old daughter, Emma. Sarah reached for her work gloves hanging by the door. I'll check the storeroom floor myself. Maybe we can salvage some of the original planks for the future restoration. Not alone, Jack insisted, grabbing his toolbox. Those old floors can be treacherous. 2 sets of eyes spot dangers twice as fast. This building has already cost you enough, Sarah protested softly. Jack placed a weathered hand on her shoulder. You hired me for an assessment, Sarah. Consider this part of my professional obligation. Besides, I've been restoring historic buildings for 25 years. I didn't build this reputation by standing back when things got challenging. As they prepared to examine the storeroom more thoroughly, the radio announcer's voice rose with local pride. Breaking news: the Blackwood Historical Society announces a special exhibition on Cole Blackwood's lost treasure, featuring newly discovered journal entries. Historians still debate whether the infamous Blackwood fortune from the 1924 train robbery exists. Sarah and Jack exchanged curious glances. The outlaw history of Blackwood was a point of local pride, with Cole Blackwood's exploits having established the town during the tumultuous Prohibition days. That's been the town's claim to fame for generations, Sarah said. Every school child in Blackwood learns about Cole's mysterious, hidden fortune, major tourist draw for the region. Jack nodded. I restored the windows in the Frontier Museum last year. Folks come from all over to see where the outlaw gang operated. Rebecca handed them each a flashlight, her eyes reflecting concern she wouldn't voice. That delivery truck knocked out another support beam down the road last week. Be careful where you step. There's probably broken glass from when this place was vandalized. As they stepped into the barn storeroom, the summer heat intensified in the enclosed space. Sunlight streamed through dust-covered windows, illuminating decades of neglect. Neither Sarah nor Jack could have imagined how the next few hours would forever change the future of Blackwood Barn, and how a desperate effort to examine damaged flooring would uncover secrets that would reach all the way to the FBI headquarters in Washington. The ancient hinges protested as Sarah pushed open the warped door to the storeroom, Jack following close behind, his flashlight beam cutting through the shadows. The air grew warmer and mustier, with each step carrying the unmistakable scent of decades-old wood meeting unwelcome moisture. Previous owner must have attempted some renovation back here, Jack observed as they entered the storeroom. These shelves aren't original to the building, added maybe 50, 60 years ago. Sarah's flashlight revealed a storeroom far larger than she had expected, stretching toward the back of the structure. Portions featured newer construction, while other sections revealed the original stone foundation and timber supports. Several floorboards were visibly damaged, warping upward as if pushed from below. Main water damage seems to be concentrated there, Jack said, pointing toward the far corner where several floorboards had completely rotted away. Foundation shifting. Not surprising in a structure this old, especially with poor maintenance. The portable dehumidifier Sarah had hastily purchased and installed the previous day was struggling against the ambient moisture, its collection tank already half full. She checked the unit, confirming it was still operational. "We need to see how extensive the damage is," she acknowledged, frustrated by the seemingly endless problems, "and find the original foundation points. These old buildings usually had stone footers that might still be sound." They moved carefully across the uneven floor, inspecting the perimeter of the spacious storeroom. Jack examined the construction with professional interest, occasionally stopping to point out features of the original craftsmanship or later modifications. "Stonework on these walls is exceptional," he noted, running his hand along a perfectly preserved section. "They don't build like this anymore. These foundations have stood for over 140 years." Sarah appreciated his evident respect for the property. In Jack, she had found not just a contractor, but someone who understood the historical value of what she was trying to save. In the weeks since purchasing Blackwood Barn, most people had regarded her decision as either foolishly romantic or financially suicidal, perhaps both. As they reached the eastern corner of the storeroom, Sarah's flashlight beam caught something unusual, a section of flooring that appeared slightly different from the surrounding wood. "What's that?" she asked, moving closer. Jack followed his experienced eye, immediately noticing what had caught her attention. "Different wood pattern," he said thoughtfully. "And look." He directed his flashlight toward a small gap between the boards where earlier water damage had caused the wood to separate. "The grain direction changes here." Sarah knelt down to examine the floor more carefully. A rectangular section approximately 3 feet across was visible, the floorboards running perpendicular to the surrounding flooring. Unlike the water-damaged sections elsewhere, these boards seemed to have been deliberately arranged. "There's something underneath," she said, excitement momentarily overriding her concern about the building's condition. "A trap door, maybe? Or some kind of storage space?" Jack joined her, placing his hand against the unusual section of flooring. He pressed experimentally at different points, his decades of restoration work having taught him that old buildings often held secrets in their construction. To their mutual surprise, a section of flooring shifted slightly under pressure. "False floor," Jack breathed, professional excitement evident in his voice. "Might be an old root cellar or maybe a Prohibition-era addition." He applied pressure more deliberately, and with a grinding sound of wood against wood, the section began to give way. Jack quickly retrieved a crowbar from his toolbox and carefully pried up the edge of what was now clearly a concealed trap door. As the section of flooring lifted away, their flashlight beams penetrated the darkness to reveal not a cellar, but what appeared to be the entrance to a narrow tunnel, its walls reinforced with aged timber. "That's not just a storage cellar," Jack stated unnecessarily, his flashlight joining Sarah's to illuminate the unexpected discovery. "That's a deliberate tunnel." Sarah carefully aimed her light into the opening, revealing rough-hewn steps leading downward into darkness. The passage appeared to be approximately 3 feet wide and reinforced with wooden supports that had somehow withstood the test of time. "Prohibition-era construction," Jack observed, examining the tunnel without entering it. "Hand-cut timber, probably local pine. The question is, where does it lead, and why was it built beneath a barn?" "Only one way to find out," Sarah said, her voice betraying both apprehension and curiosity. Jack hesitated. "We should be careful. Old tunnels can be structurally compromised. Let me go first." With careful movements, Jack positioned himself at the tunnel entrance, testing each step before putting his full weight on it. Sarah followed close behind, her flashlight beam joining his to illuminate their descent. The air grew cooler as they moved deeper, carrying the unmistakable earthy scent of underground spaces long undisturbed. The tunnel extended approximately 30 feet, gradually sloping downward before opening into a surprisingly spacious chamber that had been carved from the natural limestone beneath the property. Their flashlight beams revealed a room roughly 15 feet across its ceiling, supported by a combination of natural rock formations and carefully positioned timber braces. Against the far wall stood 3 wooden chests of varying sizes, their once polished surfaces now dulled with age, but still intact. Scattered around them were several rusted metal tools, what appeared to be bootlegging equipment, and a small writing desk with papers still visible on its surface. "This is incredible," Sarah whispered, her light illuminating the unexpected underground chamber. A hidden room beneath my property. Jack moved carefully around the perimeter, examining the construction with professional interest. This wasn't just thrown together. Someone put significant effort into creating this space. Proper ventilation channels there. He pointed to narrow shafts leading upward. Drainage system here. This was designed for long-term use. Sarah approached the largest of the wooden chests, finding it secured with a simple metal latch rather than a lock. With a deep breath, she carefully lifted the latch and opened the lid. Inside, protected from moisture and time by the well-designed underground space, lay stacks of gold coins, their surfaces tarnished but unmistakable alongside several small bars of what appeared to be silver. "Oh my God," she breathed, looking at Jack questioningly. His expression changed, eyes widening with realization. "Could be," he whispered, "the Blackwood treasure." Before he could complete his thought, a loud crash from the front of the barn interrupted the moment, the sound of a door slamming violently. "Hello," came a voice from the main room. "County Inspector. Anyone here? We've had reports of unauthorized construction work." Sarah and Jack exchanged alarmed glances. "We need to secure this," Sarah said decisively, her mind racing with implications of their discovery. "Cover it up until we can properly examine it." Jack nodded already, helping her close the chest and return to the tunnel entrance. "That treasure could be historically significant, Sarah, if it's authentic coal Blackwood loot." They worked quickly, temporarily covering the hidden entrance with the loose floorboards before heading to the front of the barn to address the unexpected visitor. The discovery had added an unexpected dimension to Sarah's already complicated situation, transforming her impulsive purchase from merely a desperate financial gamble into something potentially far more significant. As they emerged from the storeroom, dusty and startled, but trying to appear casual, they found not only the county inspector, but Rebecca engaged in conversation with him, her expression shifting rapidly from concern to protective defensiveness. "They're here now," she said to the inspector, eyes meeting Sarah's with a warning look. "As I mentioned, Ms. Reynolds is the new owner and is simply assessing renovation needs with her contractor. No actual construction has begun." The county inspector, a thin man with a clipboard and an officious manner, turned to Sarah with evident skepticism. "Ms. Reynolds, I'm Harold Davis, County Building Inspector. We've received complaints about potential code violations and unauthorized structural work at this address." Sarah and Jack exchanged puzzled glances. The timing seemed too precise to be coincidental. Someone had reported them within minutes of their discovery. Through the dusty front windows, Sarah noticed a black sedan parked across the road, its occupant watching the barn with evident interest. "How could anyone possibly know what we just found?" Sarah whispered to Jack. "We only discovered it ourselves 5 minutes ago." Jack's expression was grim. Historic properties like this attract attention, especially ones with connections to Prohibition figures. Blackwood Barn has been on preservationist radar for decades. Before they could further discuss this alarming development, the bell above the door jangled again as two more visitors entered, a middle-aged woman in a tailored suit carrying a leather portfolio and an older gentleman with wire-rimmed glasses in the careful manner of an academic. "Ms. Reynolds," the woman asked, her demeanor professional but urgent. "I'm Dr. Elizabeth Mitchell from the National Historical Preservation Office. This is Professor James Anderson from Georgetown University's History Department. We need to speak with you immediately about what you've discovered beneath your storeroom floor." The summer heat continued to press against the building's windows, but for Sarah, the true pressure was just beginning. One that would connect her failing barn to Outlaw Secret's FBI operations and a historical mystery that had remained hidden for over 90 years. In the dusty front room of Blackwood Barn, surrounded by cobwebs and broken farm equipment, Sarah found herself facing officials who somehow knew about a discovery she had made mere minutes ago. "May we come in?" Dr. Mitchell asked, though her tone suggested it wasn't really a question. "What we need to discuss is urgent and of significant historical interest." Sarah hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Of course, though I should warn you, the building is in considerable disrepair. We're just beginning to assess the renovation needs." The visitors entered, their practiced eyes sweeping the deteriorating interior before focusing back on Sarah. "This is Jack Harrison, my contractor," Sarah explained, gesturing to Jack, who stood watching the exchange with careful neutrality, "and my friend Rebecca Monroe. Professor Anderson, a slender man in his 60s with the stooped posture of someone who had spent decades bent over historical texts, spoke up. Ms. Reynolds, we have reason to believe you've uncovered historically significant artifacts in this property, potentially containing Cole Blackwood's missing fortune that has been sought by historians for generations. Sarah exchanged glances with Jack, whose subtle nod confirmed her suspicion about the hidden chamber they had found. A tunnel, she said quietly, leading to an underground room. Dr. Mitchell's eyebrows rose slightly, perhaps surprised by Sarah's forthrightness. Yes. Historical records indicate Cole Blackwood constructed a series of hidden chambers and tunnels throughout this region after the famous Gold Reserve train robbery of 1924. The loot, estimated at over $125,000 in gold and silver, approximately $3 million in today's value, disappeared after his gang was ambushed by federal agents. Blackwood Barn was built by the outlaw's cousin, Joseph Blackwood. Jack added his knowledge of historical architecture extending to the properties he restored. He was officially a cattle rancher, but local legends claim he helped hide his infamous cousin on numerous occasions. The property stayed in the Blackwood family until 1938. Professor Anderson nodded appreciatively. You know your local history, Mr. Harrison. What few people realize is that Cole Blackwood entrusted certain valuables to his cousin for safekeeping items too risky to transport, but too valuable to abandon. Sarah processed this information, connecting it to their discovery. The wooden chests we found, they contained gold coins and silver bars. Precisely, Professor Anderson confirmed with barely contained excitement. Cole and Joseph created a secure hiding place here, away from potential lawmen and rival gangs. They likely intended to retrieve the treasure after the heat died down, but Cole was killed in a shootout in Chicago, and Joseph died before he could retrieve or reveal the location. Dr. Mitchell stepped forward, her expression serious. Ms. Reynolds, those artifacts, if authentic, represent an extraordinary historical discovery. Their academic and historical value is immeasurable. Some may contain information that would completely revise our understanding of that pivotal period in American history. Sarah felt a defensive instinct rise. This discovery, this building, they represented her last chance at financial recovery. I understand the historical significance, but Blackwood Barn is my property. I purchased it legally, contents included. Of course, Dr. Mitchell acknowledged smoothly. We're not here to make claims without due process. However, given the potential historical importance, she gestured to the building's obvious state of disrepair, we'd like to propose a cooperative approach to examining and preserving these artifacts properly. The tension in the room was palpable, broken only by Rebecca's practical intervention. Perhaps we should all move to the front corner. There are still some functional chairs there, and it's the only area without active leaks. This sensible suggestion was accepted, and the group relocated to a slightly less damaged section of the barn. Despite water stains on the walls, the area retained traces of its former character, with vintage farm tools still visible on the walls. Once settled, Professor Anderson continued with evident academic enthusiasm. The Blackwood treasure has been something of a holy grail for historians of the Prohibition era for generations. References in newspaper accounts and federal reports confirm its existence, but its location remains one of the great historical mysteries of the period. Sarah considered her position carefully before responding. We found the underground chamber less than an hour ago. We haven't had time to properly examine the contents. Probably wise, Dr. Mitchell noted. Old artifacts can be extremely fragile. We have conservation specialists who can examine them without causing damage. Jack cleared his throat. With all due respect, what exactly are you proposing? Sarah owns this property and has invested everything she has in saving it from developers who would demolish it without a second thought for its historical significance. This direct question seemed to prompt a shift in Dr. Mitchell's approach. She exchanged glances with Professor Anderson before addressing Sarah directly. Ms. Reynolds, the National Historical Preservation Office would like to propose an arrangement. We need to document and preserve these materials, but we recognize your legal ownership of the property and the unique circumstances of this discovery. Professor Anderson continued, what Dr. Mitchell is suggesting is a cooperative approach. We would provide immediate assistance with your building's structural issues, engineering support, preservation, specialists, renovation grants, resources to stabilize both the barn and the artifacts. In exchange for what? Sarah asked, skeptical but interested. In exchange for your cooperation in allowing our experts to properly examine and authenticate the artifacts, Dr. Mitchell explained. No removal without proper documentation and agreement. Your rights as property owner would be respected throughout the process. The offer was tempting, particularly given Sarah's limited resources for addressing the extensive renovation needs. Still, she sensed there was more to their urgency than simple historical interest. Why the rush? She asked directly. These artifacts have been hidden for almost a century. Professor Anderson's expression became more serious. Two reasons, Ms. Reynolds. First, proper conservation is time-sensitive once artifacts are disturbed from stable conditions. Second, rumors have already begun circulating about a significant Prohibition-era discovery in Blackwood. From outside came the sound of additional vehicles arriving. Through the barn windows, Sarah could see official historical society vans and equipment resources far beyond what she could afford or access independently. They're mobilizing significant resources, Rebecca observed quietly to Sarah. Whatever is in those chests, they consider it extremely important. Sarah weighed her options carefully. The barn required extensive work, far exceeding her limited budget. The structural issues were worse than she had initially estimated. Yet this discovery potentially represented leverage, a way to ensure Blackwood Barn's preservation rather than just her temporary financial survival. I'll cooperate under certain conditions, she finally stated, meeting Dr. Mitchell's gaze directly. Your team helps secure the building from further deterioration. Nothing leaves the premises without my knowledge and consent. And most importantly, whatever historical significance is confirmed becomes part of Blackwood Barn's official record and preservation status. Professor Anderson leaned forward, clearly intrigued. You're thinking of pursuing historical landmark designation? Sarah nodded. This building represents my entire financial investment in the future security for my daughter. If these artifacts are as significant as you believe, they should help secure Blackwood Barn's future as a protected historical site rather than just another strip mall. Dr. Mitchell considered this for a moment before extending her hand. Those terms are reasonable. We'll need to formalize the arrangement, but given the historical significance, we can proceed with verbal agreement while our legal team prepares proper documentation. As they shook hands, Sarah felt a strange mix of apprehension and hope. What had begun as a desperate last-chance investment had suddenly become entangled with outlaw secrets and national historical interest. The direction of her future had shifted dramatically in the space of an hour, from simply fighting against structural decay to potentially presiding over a nationally significant historical discovery. Outside, preservation specialists were already unloading equipment, preparing to secure both the barn and its unexpected historical treasure from further deterioration. Within the hour, Blackwood Barn transformed from an abandoned, crumbling structure into the center of a coordinated historical preservation operation, all because of what might lie within those century-old wooden chests hidden beneath the storeroom floor. The true nature of her discovery and how it would reshape her future remained bound within treasures that had been patiently waiting for over 100 years, ready to reveal secrets that could rewrite history and just possibly save Sarah and her daughter from financial ruin. The termite-damaged floorboards in the storeroom had been carefully removed, revealing the entrance to the hidden tunnel beneath what had once been Blackwood's pioneer barn. Sarah Reynolds stood at the edge of the excavation, watching as preservation specialists in white cotton gloves meticulously photographed each gold coin before placing them in secure padded containers. The largest wooden chest lay open on a specially designed conservation table, its aged pine revealing the carefully carved insignia of Cole Blackwood, a distinctive crossed revolver and horseshoe that matched known samples of the outlaw's personal markings. These aren't just any Prohibition artifacts, Professor Anderson said, his voice hushed with academic reverence as he studied the contents through specialized magnifying equipment. These are the proceeds from the gold reserve heist of 1924, the robbery that historians have debated for generations. Sarah observed the professor's careful examination, still processing the surreal turn of events that had transformed her desperate financial gamble into the center of historical excitement. Just 24 hours earlier, she had been a single mother facing imminent homelessness. Now she stood surrounded by preservation experts, historians, and museum conservators, all focused intently on treasure found beneath her failing barn's floor. The authenticity is undeniable. Dr. Mitchell confirmed, comparing the coin dates and markings to authenticated period currency displayed on her tablet. The minting details where patterns and distribution of dates all match known currency from the period. What we're seeing here is physical evidence of one of the most notorious unsolved robberies in American history. Outside, the transformation of Blackwood Barn continued at remarkable speed. The Historical Preservation Office had mobilized emergency stabilization teams to address the building's most critical structural issues. Temporary supports braced weakened ceiling joists, while conservation architects meticulously documented every original feature of the pre-statehood structure. Through the windows, Sarah could see curious onlookers gathering across the road, their numbers growing as word spread throughout Blackwood and about the historic discovery. Local news vans had already arrived, reporters setting up cameras aimed at the barn's weathered facade. The coins alone are extraordinary, Professor Anderson continued, carefully turning a gold double eagle with conservation tools. Look at these San Francisco mint marks from the 1920s. Several of these dates seem extremely rare in any condition. Dr. Mitchell nodded, her professional demeanor momentarily cracking to reveal genuine historical excitement. And the silver bars with the Federal Reserve stamps match the manifest from the gold reserve car that was robbed. This completely confirms Cole Blackwood's involvement in the heist. As the experts continued their examination, Rebecca approached Sarah, stepping carefully around the equipment that now filled the barn's front room. "Channel 7 wants an interview," she said quietly, and the mayor called. "He's thrilled about this tremendous opportunity for Blackwood and wants to stop by this afternoon." Sarah smiled wryly. "Funny, 24 hours ago he wouldn't return my calls about zoning questions. Amazing how finding 100-year-old outlaw treasure changes your popularity." "Welcome to small-town politics," Rebecca observed with characteristic bluntness. Jack entered from the back of the building, conferring with the structural engineers who had been assessing the barn's foundation. Unlike the academic excitement of the historians, his focus remained practical, the physical stability of the building that housed the remarkable discovery. "North wall needs immediate reinforcement," he reported to Sarah. "They've identified active water infiltration that's compromising the original stonework. The good news is the main support beams are solid oak. They don't build with materials like that anymore." Outlaw, the preservation team had set up temporary lighting throughout the barn, illuminating decades of neglect, but also revealing glimpses of the building's original character. Hand-forged hardware, partially hidden beneath layers of rust, the faded but still visible Blackwood & Sons lettering on the wall behind the main doors. A young historian approached Sarah hesitantly, holding a tablet with digital images of documents found in the smallest chest. "Ms. Reynolds, we've begun transcribing Cole Blackwood's personal letters. There's something you should see." The historian navigated to a specific page where Blackwood's rough handwriting described his decision to entrust his stolen fortune to his cousin's care. "Joseph proves himself the most trustworthy of kin, with federal agents scouring every inch of territory and rumors of bureau detectives in town. I have entrusted my share of the gold reserve haul to his safekeeping. He has devised an ingenious hiding place beneath his establishment, known only to the two of us. Should misfortune befall me, Joseph will ensure my daughter receives her rightful inheritance." Sarah read the passage with growing wonder, realizing she was seeing a first-hand account of the very hiding place they had discovered. The connection across time felt almost tangible. Blackwood's words describing the secret compartment in which they had been hidden, finally discovered generations later. "There's more," the historian said, scrolling to another entry dated 2 weeks later. "This appears to be Blackwood's last letter before he was killed in Chicago." The letter entry described Blackwood's final arrangements and revealed the significance of the artifacts Sarah had found. "Tomorrow I ride for the Chicago territory where Williams claims to have secured safe passage. Should events turn against me, I leave these papers with Joseph as insurance, containing as they do not only my will, but details of our operation that must never fall into the hands of law enforcement. My wound from the Millerville escape troubles me still, but duty to my companions drives me forward." Blackwood was killed in a shootout near Chicago 2 weeks after writing this, Professor Anderson explained, joining them. He never returned to retrieve his treasure, and Joseph died of tuberculosis 3 years later. The secret of their hiding place died with them until today. As the historical significance of her discovery continued to unfold, Sarah felt a growing sense of responsibility. These weren't just artifacts that might save her from financial ruin. They represented a lost piece of American history that had been entrusted to her through extraordinary circumstances. The bell above the barn door jangled as a distinguished man in his 50s entered, accompanied by an aide carrying a portfolio. Despite the chaos of equipment and preservation activities, he moved with confident purpose, directly approaching Dr. Mitchell. "Elizabeth, the news reached Washington this morning," he said without preamble. "The Bureau sends its particular interest in this discovery." Dr. Mitchell straightened visibly. "Director Keller, this is unexpected. We've only just begun the authentication process. When Cole Blackwood's missing fortune surfaces after nearly a century, it becomes a priority," Director Keller replied before turning his attention to Sarah. "Miss Reynolds, I'm Thomas Keller, Director of the FBI's Historical Investigation Unit. I understand we have you to thank for preserving a significant piece of American law enforcement history." "I just bought a failing barn," Sarah replied, somewhat dazed by this latest development. "Finding outlaw treasure wasn't exactly in my renovation budget." A hint of genuine amusement crossed the director's face. "Nonetheless, your discovery has immense historical significance. Cole Blackwood's notorious gang established criminal networks that shaped the development of law enforcement across the country during Prohibition." He gestured toward the artifacts being carefully examined. "These materials may fill crucial gaps in our understanding of early Bureau operations and the economic impact of major robberies on developing communities." The FBI's Historical Investigation Unit, in conjunction with the Historical Preservation Office, would like to discuss a formal arrangement that benefits both historical preservation and your personal situation. Sarah felt a sudden wariness. Throughout this extraordinary day, she had maintained some control over her discovery. The director's arrival suggested the stakes and the government's interest were even higher than she had realized. "What kind of arrangement?" she asked cautiously. Director Keller nodded to his aide, who opened the portfolio embossed with the FBI seal. "A proposal that acknowledges both the historical significance of these artifacts and your ownership rights to the property where they were discovered." He removed several documents and continued. "The Bureau, in partnership with the Historical Preservation Trust, would like to designate Blackwood Barn as a National Historical Landmark with specific focus on its significance to Prohibition-era law enforcement history." Sarah processed this information, understanding its potential impact on her precarious financial situation. Historical landmark designation would protect the barn from development, potentially securing both its future and her investment. The designation would come with substantial restoration grants, Director Keller continued, sufficient to return Blackwood Barn to its original condition. Additionally, we propose establishing the Blackwood Center for Prohibition History here on the premises, a research facility and museum open to scholars and the public. The scope of the proposal was breathtaking. What had begun as Sarah's desperate last stand against financial ruin was transforming into something far beyond her initial hopes of simply restoring the barn for a modest business. "And my role in this?" Sarah asked, sensing there must be more to the arrangement. "We would like to offer you the position of site director," the director stated. "Your background in intelligence analysis before your divorce makes you uniquely qualified. The position includes residence rights to the renovated caretaker's cottage and a substantial annual salary funded through the Historical Trust." Sarah felt momentarily dizzy as the pieces fell into place. Her previous career, abandoned during the bitter divorce and subsequent financial collapse, had been in intelligence analysis at the NSA. Director Keller's staff had clearly conducted thorough background research. "This is overwhelming," Sarah admitted, looking around at the deteriorating barn that was apparently being offered as the centerpiece of a new historical institution with herself at its helm. "Take time to consider," Director Keller advised. "The formal proposal includes all details regarding funding, restoration timelines, and your contractual position. For now, we need your permission to transfer the artifacts to proper conservation facilities while maintaining clear records of their provenance and your discovery rights." As afternoon faded into evening, Sarah found herself signing temporary custody agreements for the artifacts while being assured of her central role in their future presentation and interpretation. The day's extraordinary events, from desperate property assessment to outlaw treasure discovery to a personal offer from the FBI's historical director, had transformed her circumstances so completely that she struggled to process the implications. Standing in the barn's small side yard as twilight settled over Blackwood, Sarah was joined by Rebecca, who had worked tirelessly throughout the day, helping coordinate the sudden influx of officials and experts. "So," Rebecca said simply, "director of a National Historical Center. Quite a promotion from broke single mom with a crumbling barn in less than 24 hours." Sarah gazed at the barn's weathered timber exterior, seeing it now not as a desperate last investment, but as the setting for an institution of historical significance, with herself no longer fighting for survival, but leading a prestigious historical center. "Life changes in an instant," she replied quietly. "Yesterday I was facing homelessness. Today I'm being offered the chance to preserve history and rebuild my life simultaneously." As preservation personnel continued their work inside the barn, Sarah allowed herself a moment to absorb the transformation of her circumstances, a transformation as dramatic and unexpected as the frontier secrets that had lain hidden beneath her feet, waiting for precisely the right moment to emerge from darkness into light. "The question is," Rebecca said, ever practical, "what happens next? They're offering you everything you need: financial stability, housing, purpose. But it's also binding your future to this place completely." And Sarah considered this perspective, watching as additional preservation specialists arrived with specialized equipment for documenting the barn's original architectural features. "Sometimes the path forward appears in the most unexpected places," she said. "My grandfather always said, opportunity doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It slips in through the back door when you're busy looking elsewhere." The mention of her grandfather brought a moment of reflection. The lessons he had taught her about resiliency and adapting to changing circumstances had driven her to this desperate purchase, which had now opened an entirely new future she could never have anticipated. "He would have loved this," Sarah said softly. "The history, the discovery, the second chance emerging from seeming disaster." Inside the barn, the preservation team had set up powerful spotlights to continue their work into the evening. The illumination transformed the building's facade, highlighting architectural details long obscured by neglect. Neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk across the road, watching the unprecedented activity with curious excitement. Jack approached carrying architectural plans now marked with preservation notations. "The structural team has completed their initial assessment," he reported. "The foundation is better than we feared. These buildings were built to last. With proper restoration, Blackwood Barn could stand another century easily." Sarah noticed something different in Jack's demeanor, a professional excitement that matched her own growing sense of possibility. "You're enjoying this," she observed. He smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "Watching history come alive. Seeing craftsmanship from 140 years ago, finally getting the recognition it deserves. This is why I went into historical restoration in the first place." Their conversation was interrupted as Professor Anderson hurried outside, clutching his tablet with evident excitement. "Ms. Reynolds, we found something extraordinary in Blackwood's personal papers, something that changes everything about how we understand the gold reserve robbery." He showed her the screen, where a high-resolution image displayed a page from Blackwood's journal. The entry described not just the robbery itself, but a secret arrangement with someone identified only by the initials JEH. "This reveals that Blackwood's famous heist wasn't just a standard robbery," the professor explained, his voice low, despite their relative privacy. "The initials JEH appear repeatedly throughout the journal, along with coded references to something called Operation Slingshot." Sarah's intelligence background immediately recognized the significance. JEH, that would be J. Edgar Hoover. He became the first director of the Bureau of Investigation in 1924, the same year as the gold reserve robbery. Professor Anderson nodded, impressed by her knowledge. "Exactly. And look at this cipher in the margins. It's remarkably similar to early Bureau encryption methods. We're just beginning to decode it, but the implications are staggering." Jack, who had been listening quietly, let out a low whistle. "Are you suggesting that Cole Blackwood wasn't just a notorious outlaw, but had some connection to the early FBI?" "It's too early to make definitive claims," the professor cautioned, "but these documents hint at something far more complex than a simple outlaw treasure. The gold reserve robbery may have been part of an early intelligence operation against bootlegging organizations." The historical implications were clearly significant, but Sarah was struck by the human element of the story, the complex web of loyalty and secrecy that had characterized the Prohibition era. Their contribution erased from official histories until this moment. History is always more complicated than the simplified versions we learn, she observed. More human with all the messy courage and contradiction that implies. Professor Anderson nodded appreciatively. Precisely why these artifacts are so valuable. They give us the unfiltered reality, not the sanitized account that made it into official records. As night fell completely temporary, lighting illuminated the barn like a stage set. News crews had set up across the street, broadcasting live updates about the historic discovery. Local residents continued to gather, their numbers growing as word spread throughout the small town. Mayor Thompson's car pulled up, the town's political leader, emerging with an entourage of council members, all eager to associate themselves with what was quickly becoming Blackwood's most significant historical event in generations. Reynolds, the mayor called, approaching with hand extended and camera-ready smile in place. What a tremendous day for our community. The historical significance of your discovery cannot be overstated. Sarah accepted his handshake with gracious restraint, recalling how the same official had dismissed her zoning questions just days earlier. It's been quite unexpected, she replied simply. The town council is prepared to fast-track any permissions needed for the restoration, he continued enthusiastically. Blackwood stands ready to support this historical treasure in every way possible. As the mayor launched into what sounded like a practice speech about historical preservation and community heritage, Sarah caught Rebecca's knowing glance. They both recognized the political opportunism at work, but also understood that such support would prove valuable for the barn's future. Director Keller emerged from the barn, joining their conversation with purposeful authority that subtly redirected the mayor's attention. Mayor Thompson, the Bureau appreciates Blackwood's enthusiasm. We'll need coordinated support as we develop the Blackwood Center. Perhaps your office could help facilitate community engagement sessions in the coming weeks. The director's diplomatic redirection impressed Sarah, acknowledging the mayor's importance while channeling his energy toward constructive purposes rather than mere publicity. As the officials discussed logistics, Sarah stepped away, needing a moment of quiet to process the day's extraordinary developments. She found herself near the barn's back entrance, a small, overgrown area where moonlight illuminated remnants of what had once been a corral. Jack found her there, respectfully maintaining distance while offering silent companionship as she contemplated the whirlwind transformation of her circumstances. When I bid on this place, Sarah said eventually, I thought I was crazy spending my last dollars on a building that might be beyond saving. Everyone told me to walk away. Sometimes the biggest risks bring the most unexpected rewards, Jack observed, though I doubt anyone could have predicted outlaw treasure beneath the storeroom floor. Sarah smiled. Life has a strange way of revealing pathways just when all doors seem closed. The quiet moment was interrupted by Rebecca, who appeared with 3 cups of coffee from the shop down the road. Fair warning, she said, handing them each a cup. Reporter from the National Geographic wants an interview. The preservation team needs decisions about original features versus modern necessities, and Director Keller is talking about a formal announcement ceremony tomorrow. Sarah took a deep breath, accepting both the coffee and the responsibilities that had arrived so unexpectedly. From bankruptcy to historical landmark director in 24 hours, she said with a hint of wonder. I'm not sure I fully processed that this is really happening. It's happening, Rebecca confirmed, and while it's an amazing opportunity, it's also going to be a marathon, not a sprint. They're talking about a year-long restoration process, developing educational programs, cataloging artifacts. Building something meaningful takes time, Jack added. Just like the original construction of this place in the 1880s. Joseph Blackwood didn't know his barn would someday house secret outlaw treasure or become a historical center, but he built it to last anyway. This perspective resonated with Sarah. The building that had seemed like her last desperate gamble was revealing itself as something far more significant, a container for history that had patiently waited for the right moment to reveal its secrets. As they returned to the front of the barn, the scene had transformed yet again. Powerful lights had been set up for a formal press conference with Dr. Mitchell and Professor Anderson preparing to address the growing crowd of journalists and community members. Director Keller approached Sarah. We'd like you to join the announcement. After all, this discovery wouldn't have happened without your decision to purchase and investigate this building. Sarah hesitated, still adjusting to her sudden transformation from anonymous single mother to central figure in a major historical discovery. What should I say? She asked, genuinely uncertain of her role in the unfolding narrative. Just share your authentic experience, the director advised. How it felt to discover these artifacts, what this building means to you, your vision for its future as part of our shared historical legacy. As Sarah took her place beside the historical experts, cameras focused on the unlikely group standing before the weathered facade of Blackwood Barn. The building that had seemed like a foolish last stand against financial ruin now stood illuminated literally and figuratively, its historical significance finally recognized after generations of obscurity. Professor Anderson spoke first, explaining the historical significance of Blackwood's treasure with academic precision. Dr. Mitchell followed, outlining the authentication process and preliminary findings about the artifact's contents. Finally, Director Keller announced the preliminary agreement to establish the Blackwood Center for Prohibition History. Then, with surprising nervousness, Sarah stepped forward to address the gathered crowd. Looking out at the faces of community members, journalists, officials, and historians, she found her voice. Yesterday, I was a broke single mother with nothing but this crumbling barn between me and homelessness. She began with unflinching honesty. Today, I stand before you as the guardian of a historical treasure that changes our understanding of a pivotal moment in American history. She gestured to the barn behind her. Blackwood Barn wasn't just a barn, it was a witness to history, a keeper of secrets, and now a gateway to understanding our past more completely. What seemed like the end of my story has become a new beginning, not just for me and my daughter, but for this building and the history it protected for nearly a century. As cameras flashed and reporters called questions, Sarah felt a profound shift in her understanding of value and opportunity. The true worth of her desperate purchase had nothing to do with real estate or business potential. It lay in the historical connections that had been patiently waiting to be discovered, in the stories that would now be preserved rather than lost to time. The failing barn that had represented her last financial hope had revealed itself to be something far more valuable, a physical connection to a pivotal moment in history, a bridge between past and future, and the foundation for a second chance she could never have imagined. Yet as the excitement of the moment carried her forward, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they had only scratched the surface of what the Blackwood treasure truly represented. The coded journal entries, the mysterious connection to J. Edgar Hoover, the timing of the gold reserve robbery, all suggested a deeper story waiting to be uncovered. Little did she know that her greatest challenge still lay ahead, as the true nature of Cole Blackwood's activities would soon draw the attention of forces far more dangerous than county inspectors and small-town politicians, forces that had spent nearly a century ensuring certain secrets remained buried. In the dusty front room of Blackwood Barn, surrounded by cobwebs and broken farm equipment, Sarah found herself facing officials who somehow knew about a discovery she had made mere minutes ago. "May we come in?" Dr. Mitchell asked, though her tone suggested it wasn't really a question. "What we need to discuss is urgent and of significant historical interest." Sarah hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Of course, though, I should warn you, the building is in considerable disrepair. We're just beginning to assess the renovation needs." The visitors entered, their practiced eyes sweeping the deteriorating interior before focusing back on Sarah. "This is Jack Harrison, my contractor," Sarah explained, gesturing to Jack, who stood watching the exchange with careful neutrality. "And my friend, Rebecca Monroe." Professor Anderson, a slender man in his 60s with the stooped posture of someone who had spent decades bent over historical texts, spoke up. "Mrs. Reynolds, we have reason to believe you've uncovered historically significant artifacts in this property, potentially containing Cole Blackwood's missing fortune that has been sought by historians for generations." Sarah exchanged glances with Jack, whose subtle nod confirmed her suspicion about the hidden chamber they had found. "A tunnel," she said quietly, "leading to an underground room." Mitchell's eyebrows rose slightly, perhaps surprised by Sarah's forthrightness. "Yes, historical records indicate Cole Blackwood constructed a series of hidden chambers and tunnels throughout this region after the famous Gold Reserve train robbery of 1924. The loot, estimated at over $125,000 in gold and silver, approximately $3 million in today's value, disappeared after his gang was ambushed by federal agents. Blackwood Barn was built by the Outlaw's cousin, Joseph Blackwood. Jack added his knowledge of historical architecture, extending to the properties he restored. He was officially a cattle rancher, but local legends claim he helped hide his infamous cousin on numerous occasions. The property stayed in the Blackwood family until 1938. Professor Anderson nodded appreciatively. You know your local history, Mr. Harrison. What few people realize is that Cole Blackwood entrusted certain valuables to his cousin for safekeeping items too risky to transport but too valuable to abandon. Sarah processed this information, connecting it to their discovery. The wooden chests we found, they contained gold coins and silver bars. Precisely, Professor Anderson confirmed with barely contained excitement. Cole and Joseph created a secure hiding place here away from potential lawmen and rival gangs. They likely intended to retrieve the treasure after the heat died down, but Cole was killed in a shootout in Chicago, and Joseph died before he could retrieve or reveal the location. Dr. Mitchell stepped forward, her expression serious. Ms. Reynolds, those artifacts, if authentic, represent an extraordinary historical discovery. Their academic and historical value is immeasurable. Some may contain information that would completely revise our understanding of that pivotal period in American history. Sarah felt a defensive instinct rise. This discovery, this building, they represented her last chance at financial recovery. I understand the historical significance, but Blackwood Barn is my property. I purchased it legally, contents included. Of course, Dr. Mitchell acknowledged smoothly. We're not here to make claims without due process. However, given the potential historical importance, she gestured to the building's obvious state of disrepair. We'd like to propose a cooperative approach to examining and preserving these artifacts properly. The tension in the room was palpable, broken only by Rebecca's practical intervention. Perhaps we should all move to the front corner. There are still some functional chairs there, and it's the only area without active leaks. This sensible suggestion was accepted, and the group relocated to a slightly less damaged section of the barn. Despite water stains on the walls, the area retained traces of its former character, with vintage farm tools still visible on the walls. Once settled, Professor Anderson continued with evident academic enthusiasm. The Blackwood treasure has been something of a holy grail for historians of the Prohibition era for generations. References in newspaper accounts and federal reports confirm its existence, but its location remains one of the great historical mysteries of the period. Sarah considered her position carefully before responding. We found the underground chamber less than an hour ago. We haven't had time to properly examine the contents. Probably wise, Dr. Mitchell noted. Old artifacts can be extremely fragile. We have conservation specialists who can examine them without causing damage. Jack cleared his throat. With all due respect, what exactly are you proposing? Sarah owns this property and has invested everything she has in saving it from developers who would demolish it without a second thought for its historical significance. This direct question seemed to prompt a shift in Dr. Mitchell's approach. She exchanged glances with Professor Anderson before addressing Sarah directly. Ms. Reynolds, the National Historical Preservation Office, would like to propose an arrangement. We need to document and preserve these materials, but we recognize your legal ownership of the property and the unique circumstances of this discovery. Professor Anderson continued, what Dr. Mitchell is suggesting is a cooperative approach. We would provide immediate assistance with your building's structural issues, engineering support, preservation, specialists, renovation grants, resources to stabilize both the barn and the artifacts. In exchange for what? Sarah asked, skeptical but interested. In exchange for your cooperation and allowing our experts to properly examine and authenticate the artifacts. Dr. Mitchell explained, no removal without proper documentation and agreement. Your rights as property owner would be respected throughout the process. The offer was tempting, particularly given Sarah's limited resources for addressing the extensive renovation needs. Still, she sensed there was more to their urgency than simple historical interest. Why the rush? She asked directly. These artifacts have been hidden for almost a century. Professor Anderson's expression became more serious. 2 reasons, Ms. Reynolds. First, proper conservation is time-sensitive, once artifacts are disturbed from the stable conditions. Second, rumors have already begun circulating about a significant Prohibition-era discovery in Blackwood. From outside came the sound of additional vehicles arriving. Through the barn windows, Sarah could see official historical society vans and equipment resources far beyond what she could afford or access independently. They're mobilizing significant resources, Rebecca observed quietly to Sarah. Whatever is in those chests, they consider it extremely important. Sarah weighed her options carefully. The barn required extensive work far exceeding her limited budget. The structural issues were worse than she had initially estimated. Yet this discovery potentially represented leverage, a way to ensure Blackwood Barn's preservation rather than just her temporary financial survival. "I'll cooperate under certain conditions," she finally stated, meeting Dr. Mitchell's gaze directly. "Your team helps secure the building from further deterioration. Nothing leaves the premises without my knowledge and consent. And most importantly, whatever historical significance is confirmed becomes part of Blackwood Barn's official record and preservation status." Professor Anderson leaned forward, clearly intrigued. "You're thinking of pursuing historical landmark designation?" Sarah nodded. "This building represents my entire financial investment and the future security for my daughter. If these artifacts are as significant as you believe, they should help secure Blackwood Barn's future as a protected historical site rather than just another strip mall." Dr. Mitchell considered this for a moment before extending her hand. "Those terms are reasonable. We'll need to formalize the arrangement, but given the historical significance, we can proceed with verbal agreement while our legal team prepares proper documentation." As they shook hands, Sarah felt a strange mix of apprehension and hope. What had begun as a desperate last-chance investment had suddenly become entangled with outlaw secrets and national historical interests. The direction of her future had shifted dramatically in the space of an hour, from simply fighting against structural decay to potentially presiding over a nationally significant historical discovery. As the historical team prepared to examine the underground chamber more thoroughly, Sarah stepped outside for a moment of quiet reflection. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the barnyard, where preservation specialists were already unloading equipment from unmarked vans. She found Rebecca leaning against the weathered fence, watching the activity with a journalist's analytical eye. "This is happening fast, Sarah, too fast. How did they know about the discovery so quickly?" Sarah had been wondering the same thing. "That's been bothering me too. We uncovered that chamber less than an hour ago. There's no way normal communications channels could have mobilized this response so quickly." Rebecca lowered her voice. "I've been doing some background research on Professor Anderson while they were setting up. He's not just any historian. Before Georgetown, he spent 20 years working for the Department of Justice Archives, specializing in Prohibition-era Bureau of Investigation operations." Sarah's intelligence background immediately registered the significance. Bureau of Investigation, that's what the FBI was called back then. "You think there's a government interest in this beyond historical preservation?" "I think," Rebecca said carefully, "that when a former DOJ archivist shows up within minutes of discovering a hidden chamber from the 1920s, accompanied by a federal preservation officer and followed by unmarked vans full of equipment, there might be more at stake than academic interest." Sarah's gaze shifted to the black sedan still parked across the street, its occupant now standing beside the vehicle, speaking into what appeared to be a radio. "Looks like our county inspector friend is reporting to someone." "Harold Davis isn't just a building inspector," Rebecca confirmed. "I recognized him from a fundraiser last year. Former Bureau field agent, retired 5 years ago. Now does consulting work while serving as our county's part-time inspector." The pieces were beginning to form a pattern that Sarah's analyst training couldn't ignore. 3 former or current federal employees converging within minutes of our discovery. That's not coincidence. "The question is," Rebecca said, "what's in those chests that has the federal government so interested after all these years?" Before Sarah could respond, Jack emerged from the barn, his expression caught between professional excitement and wariness. "They're setting up a full conservation lab down there. I've never seen preservation equipment like this outside of the Smithsonian. Military-grade lighting, atmospheric controls, digital scanning systems. This isn't standard historical society gear." Sarah made a decision. "Jack, I need you to keep an eye on what they're doing. Use your restoration expertise as cover, but watch everything they document. Rebecca, see what else you can find out about our visitors. I'm going to make a call. Inside the barn's old tack room, now serving as a temporary office, Sarah pulled out her phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. After 3 rings, a familiar voice answered. Martinelli. Tony, it's Sarah Reynolds. I need a favor. A pause. Sarah, it's been, 3 years since you left the agency, heard about the divorce. Tough break. I need information, Tony, off the record. There's a historical preservation office team crawling all over my property led by a Dr. Elizabeth Mitchell. They showed up suspiciously fast after a discovery was made. Can you run her name through the database? You know I can't access agency systems for personal. This isn't personal. There's something happening here that feels like an operation, not historical research. 3 federal employees, including a former DOJ archivist and retired field agent, converged on my property within minutes of uncovering a hidden chamber from the Prohibition era. The line went silent for a moment. Give me the names. I'll see what I can find. But Sarah, if this is what it sounds like, be careful. History has a way of creating dangerous ripples in the present. After providing the details, Sarah returned to the barn just as the conservation team was bringing up the first items from the underground chamber, the smallest of the 3 wooden chests now carefully supported in a specially designed container to prevent further deterioration. Dr. Mitchell gestured for Sarah to join them as they prepared to open the chest under controlled conditions. Ms. Reynolds, as the property owner, you should be present for the initial documentation. The preservation specialist had set up a makeshift conservation lab in the center of the barn's main room. Bright lights illuminated the work area where acid-free paper covered folding tables equipped with digital cameras and scanning equipment. The chest was placed carefully in the center as everyone gathered around. We'll proceed systematically, Dr. Mitchell explained. First, non-invasive documentation photographs, measurements, external analysis. Then we'll open the chest and catalog each item individually. The process was meticulous, with every aspect of the chest documented before the conservator finally released the simple iron latch. As the lid was carefully raised, even the experienced professionals couldn't suppress a collective intake of breath. Unlike the larger chest Sarah had glimpsed earlier, containing gold and silver, this smaller container held stacks of documents, letters, ledgers, and what appeared to be journals, all remarkably preserved in the stable environment of the underground chamber. Professor Anderson leaned forward, his academic demeanor giving way to barely contained excitement. These appear to be Cole Blackwood's personal papers. If authentic, they represent an unprecedented window into Prohibition-era operations. The conservator gently lifted the first document, a leather-bound journal with the initials CB embossed on the cover. Using specialized tools, she opened it to reveal pages of handwritten text interspersed with what appeared to be code or cipher. Remarkable preservation, she murmured. The dry, cool conditions in that chamber were perfect for paper conservation. Professor Anderson studied the open pages through a magnifying glass. This is definitely Cole Blackwood's handwriting, matches known samples from court documents. But these cipher sections... He paused, adjusting his glasses. I've seen this pattern before in early Bureau of Investigation communications. Sarah moved closer. You're saying Cole Blackwood, the notorious outlaw, was using a bureau cipher? Not exactly, the professor replied carefully. I'm saying this pattern resembles bureau methods, which raises interesting questions about Blackwood's connections. The conservator continued removing documents, each carefully placed on acid-free paper for preliminary examination. Among them was a stack of letters tied with faded string, the top envelope addressed simply with the initials J.E.H. Dr. Mitchell exchanged a significant glance with Professor Anderson. J.E.H. Those would be John Edgar Hoover's initials. He became director of the Bureau of Investigation in 1920. The same year as the Gold Reserve robbery, Sarah noted, her analyst's mind automatically connecting dates. As the team continued to document the contents, Sarah noticed the County Inspector Harold Davis watching the proceedings with an intensity that seemed excessive for a local building official. When he stepped outside to make another call, she followed discreetly, positioning herself near an open window where she could overhear his conversation. Sir, they have opened the first chest, documents only correspondence, journals, ledgers. Yes, the cipher patterns are visible. Anderson recognized them immediately. A pause. No, they haven't found it yet. The larger chest remains sealed. Another pause. Understood. We'll continue monitoring. Keller arrives in 30 minutes. Sarah moved away before Davis could spot her, eavesdropping, her mind racing. Whoever was on the other end of that call knew exactly what they were looking for, and it wasn't just historical artifacts. Back inside, the team had moved on to examining a series of ledgers found beneath the journals. Professor Anderson was studying one with particular interest, occasionally making notes on a small pad. These aren't just outlaw accounts, he said finally. These are systematic records of bootlegging operations across 5 states. Names, dates, amounts, locations. But look at the annotation symbols in the margins. He pointed to small marks next to certain entries. These indicate enforcement actions that followed. Raids, arrests, confiscations. Dr. Mitchell leaned closer. You're suggesting these are intelligence records, not criminal accounts. I'm suggesting, the professor said carefully, that someone was tracking bootlegging operations and subsequent law enforcement responses with remarkable precision. Rebecca, who had been quietly observing, spoke up, almost as if the person writing this knew about the raids before they happened. The room fell silent as the implications settled over the group. Sarah's mind immediately jumped to the coded correspondence with the initials J.E.H. J. Edgar Hoover, the man who would transform the Bureau of Investigation into the modern FBI. Was Cole Blackwood working with the Bureau? She asked directly. Professor Anderson's expression remained carefully neutral. It's too early to draw conclusions. These documents will require extensive analysis. But Sarah had spent years recognizing patterns as an intelligence analyst. The precision of the records, the Bureau cipher, the correspondence with Hoover's initials, they painted a picture that contradicted the historical account of Cole Blackwood as merely a notorious outlaw. I think, she said slowly, we need to examine the larger chest now. The second chest, containing the gold and silver Sarah had glimpsed earlier, was brought up and documented with the same meticulous care. Each coin was photographed, weighed, and recorded. Rare double eagles and silver dollars, many in uncirculated condition, representing a fortune even by modern standards. The numismatic value alone is extraordinary, the conservator explained. Beyond the precious metal content, some of these dates and mint marks are extremely rare. This 1921 double eagle could fetch over 100,000 at an auction just by itself. But it was a false bottom discovered beneath the coins that drew the most interest. When carefully removed, it revealed a compartment containing several folders of photographs, surveillance images showing men in expensive suits entering warehouses, loading trucks, and meeting in remote locations. Each photograph was labeled with a name, date, and location. Many featured notorious figures from Prohibition-era organized crime. Names like Torrio Capone and Moran appeared repeatedly. These are surveillance photographs. Jack observed, his military background evident in his assessment. Professional quality, taken with telephoto lenses from concealed positions. This wasn't amateur work. Professor Anderson examined several images with growing excitement. These show operations that were never publicly documented. This one, he held up a photograph of a meeting between several well-dressed men, shows Johnny Torrio and Al Capone meeting with corrupt officials in 1923. The Bureau suspected this meeting occurred, but never had proof. As the team continued cataloging the photographs, the sound of another vehicle arriving drew Sarah's attention to the window. A black government-issue Suburban had pulled up, and a man in his 50s emerged, his bearing unmistakably that of someone accustomed to authority. Harold Davis immediately approached him, engaging in what appeared to be a situation briefing. Director Keller has arrived. Doctor. Mitchell noted, straightening her jacket. Who exactly is Director Keller? Sarah asked. Thomas Keller, director of the FBI's Historical Investigation Unit, Dr. Mitchell explained. When discoveries potentially impact Bureau history, his department has oversight responsibility. The barn door opened moments later, and Director Keller entered, surveying the operation with a practiced eye before approaching Sarah. Ms. Reynolds, I'm Thomas Keller. Thank you for your cooperation in this matter. I understand you've made quite a significant historical discovery. His handshake was firm, his manner professional but warm, yet Sarah sensed the calculating assessment behind his friendly demeanor. This was a man accustomed to gathering information while revealing nothing. It appears I have, she replied, though I'm still trying to understand why my finding requires the attention of an FBI director. A brief smile crossed Keller's face. Former field agent and analyst, NSA. I can see those skills haven't diminished. Before Sarah could express surprise at his knowledge of her background, he continued. The Bureau takes its history seriously, Ms. Reynolds, particularly when that history intersects with current operations. Current operations, Sarah repeated. How does a century-old outlaw treasure relate to current FBI concerns? Director Keller glanced at the documents spread across the tables. History isn't always as buried as we think. Some secrets once exposed can still have significant implications. He turned to Professor Anderson. What have you found? The professor summarized their discoveries. The journals with Bureau ciphers, the correspondence with JEH, the detailed bootlegging records, and the surveillance photographs. The evidence suggests Cole Blackwood may have had a relationship with the early Bureau, Anderson concluded, though its exact nature remains unclear. Director Keller nodded thoughtfully. Have you opened the third chest? Not yet, Dr. Mitchell replied. We were proceeding systematically. I'd like to be present for that. Keller said, his tone making it clear this was more than a request. As preparations were made to bring up the final chest, Sarah's phone vibrated with a text message. It was from Tony Martinelli. Mitchell and Keller, both active senior bureau. Official OP designation, Slingshot Legacy. Classified presidential authority. Call me ASAP. Sarah slipped the phone back into her pocket, her apprehension growing. Whatever they were uncovering went far beyond historical interest. It had triggered a classified modern operation authorized at the highest levels. The third and largest chest was carefully transported from the underground chamber and placed on the examination table. Like the others, it was documented meticulously before being opened. Inside, beneath another layer of gold coins, they found a metal document case, its surface etched with an eagle insignia. That's an early Bureau of Investigation security container, Professor Anderson identified immediately, used for transporting classified materials between field offices in the 1920s. The case was locked with a combination mechanism still intact after nearly a century. Can it be opened without damaging it? Sarah asked. The conservator examined it carefully. The mechanism appears functional, but without the combination. 5924, Director Keller said quietly. All eyes turned to him. May 1924, he explained, the date Hoover took over the Bureau. It was a standard combination for field containers during that period. The conservator carefully turned the dials to the specified numbers, and with a soft click, the mechanism released. Inside lay a leather portfolio stamped with the words, Operation Slingshot, Most Secret. The room fell silent as Director Keller gently lifted the portfolio and placed it on the examination surface. With the conservator's assistance, he opened it to reveal a typed document on Bureau letterhead dated June 15, 1924, and signed by J. Edgar Hoover himself. To Special Agent Cole Blackwood, Keller read aloud, your deep cover assignment under Operation Slingshot is hereby activated. You will proceed as discussed utilizing the established outlaw persona to infiltrate targeted bootlegging operations. All intelligence gathered will be transmitted through established channels only. The Bureau formally disavows any knowledge of your activities. Success in this mission is vital to the security of our nation. The sacrifices demanded are acknowledged but necessary. The revelation hung in the air for several seconds before Rebecca broke the silence. Cole Blackwood wasn't an outlaw. He was an undercover Bureau agent. Professor Anderson was already examining subsequent pages. This changes everything we thought we knew about early Bureau operations. Hoover officially claimed the Bureau never used undercover agents during this period. It was one of his public positions that agents should be above reproach, identifiable by their suits and professional demeanor. While secretly running one of the most extensive undercover operations in American history, Dr. Mitchell added the historian in her, clearly fascinated despite the professional implications. Director Keller carefully turned to the next document, a mission brief outlining the true nature of Operation Slingshot. The gold reserve robbery wasn't a criminal act, he summarized. It was a Bureau operation designed to establish Blackwood's credibility with the bootlegging syndicates. The gold was federal property temporarily stolen to cement his outlaw reputation. Sarah studied Keller's face, noting the careful control in his expression. You knew about this already. This isn't a discovery for you, it's a confirmation. Keller met her gaze directly. The Bureau has had indications of Operation Slingshot's existence for decades. Fragmentary records, rumors, inconsistencies in the official history. But the operation itself was compartmentalized, its full details known only to Hoover and a handful of senior officials. When rumors of your discovery reached us, we activated contingency procedures established for precisely this scenario. What scenario exactly? Sarah pressed. The scenario where America learns that one of its most notorious outlaws was actually a patriot who sacrificed his reputation, his future, and ultimately his life in service to his country. Keller's voice carried a note of genuine respect. Cole Blackwood allowed himself to be remembered as a criminal so that his work could continue undetected. As the team continued examining the documents, the full scope of Operation Slingshot emerged. During the early Prohibition years, the fledgling Bureau of Investigation had struggled to combat the rising power of organized crime syndicates profiting from bootlegging. Traditional law enforcement methods proved ineffective against the sophisticated criminal networks. Hoover, newly appointed as Bureau Director and desperate to prove his agency's value, authorized an unprecedented covert operation. Cole Blackwood, a decorated World War I veteran and early Bureau agent, was selected to create a deep cover identity as an outlaw. His mission: infiltrate the bootlegging operations, gather intelligence on criminal networks, and identify the corrupt officials enabling them. The gold reserve robbery had been staged to establish his credentials, with the stolen gold intended for eventual return to government vaults. But when Blackwood penetrated deeper than anticipated into the criminal hierarchy, the operation expanded. His intelligence led to dozens of successful enforcement actions against bootlegging operations across multiple states. He was extraordinarily successful, Professor Anderson noted, reviewing the operational reports. These records indicate his information led to the seizure of over $2 million in illegal alcohol, the arrest of hundreds of bootleggers, and the identification of more than 50 corrupt officials. So why wasn't he ever acknowledged? Rebecca asked. Why maintain the fiction that he was a criminal? Director Keller sighed. Politics. By 1928, Hoover was consolidating his power and crafting the Bureau's public image. A celebrated hero who operated by breaking the law even under orders didn't fit the narrative of incorruptible G-men in suits and ties. And there were powerful people implicated in Blackwood's intelligence who were never brought to justice. Sarah was examining a map found within the portfolio, a detailed chart showing bootlegging routes, corrupt officials, and enforcement vulnerabilities across the Midwest. Certain locations were marked with a distinctive red star, including one directly over Blackwood Barn. What do these stars indicate? She asked. Keller studied the map. Safe houses, perhaps, or intelligence dead drops. Jack, who had been quietly examining the construction details of the underground chamber, joined the conversation. This chamber wasn't just a hiding place for treasure. Look at the design: separate ventilation systems, multiple escape routes, reinforced walls. This was built as an operational base. As they continued exploring the documents, Sarah discovered a sealed envelope addressed to be opened only in case of compromise. The wax seal remained unbroken after nearly a century. Should we open it? She asked, looking to Director Keller. As the property owner, that's your decision, he replied carefully. But these materials fall under national security provisions. Their contents could still have significant implications. Sarah weighed the historical value against the potential security concerns. Let's proceed, but with appropriate caution. With the conservator's assistance, the seal was carefully broken, revealing a letter in Cole Blackwood's handwriting and several pages of encoded text. My final testament, the letter began. If you are reading this, Operation Slingshot has been compromised, or I have fallen in the line of duty. The accompanying pages contain the names of every corrupt official, from local police to federal judges, implicated in the bootlegging networks. This list represents 2 years of deep cover work and has been encoded using the Sapphire protocol known only to Director Hoover. The encoded pages likely contain names that were never publicly exposed, Professor Anderson observed. Professor Anderson. Historical dynamite. And potentially still sensitive, Director Keller added. Many of these individuals would have had descendants who remain in positions of power today. As Sarah considered the implications, her phone vibrated again, another message from Tony Martinelli. Capone Foundation still active, monitors all research into Prohibition-era operations. Dangerous players. Watch your back. Before she could process this warning, a new document caught her attention, a personal letter from J. Edgar Hoover to Cole Blackwood, dated just days before Blackwood's death in the Chicago shootout. Your intelligence on the Chicago operation is the most significant breakthrough in our war against organized crime, Hoover had written. The financial records you've secured will provide the evidence needed for federal prosecution where local enforcement has failed. Your service to this nation, though it must remain unacknowledged, represents the highest tradition of sacrifice. The financial records, Sarah murmured, looking up at Director Keller. Blackwood was killed in Chicago in 1924, supposedly in a random shootout with police. But according to this, he had obtained critical financial evidence. Evidence that was never found, Keller confirmed. The shootout was no accident. Once the syndicates realized they had been infiltrated, they arranged an ambush. What Blackwood had discovered was apparently significant enough that they couldn't risk it becoming public. Professor Anderson was reviewing the timeline. This letter is dated just 3 days before Blackwood's death. If he obtained crucial financial records and then was immediately killed, he must have hidden or transmitted the evidence before the ambush. Sarah finished the thought. And if it wasn't found with his body, all eyes turned to the underground chamber where the conservation team was still documenting the surroundings. Could there be more hidden compartments, Doctor? Mitchell asked. Another level of security beyond the chests themselves. Jack was already examining the chamber walls more carefully. These stone configurations aren't random. They follow a pattern, one that a trained eye might recognize. Sarah recalled her grandfather's stories about hidden compartments in old homesteads. Check for irregular mortar lines or stones that don't match the surrounding pattern. After several minutes of methodical examination, Jack's experience paid off. Hear this section of the wall. The stones are the same type, but the cutting pattern is subtly different. With the conservator's assistance, they carefully examined the section Jack had identified. What appeared to be solid stonework was revealed to be an expertly crafted false panel. When the correct pressure was applied, it swung inward, revealing a small cavity containing a metal document case similar to the one found in the third chest. Another bureau security container, Professor Anderson identified. But this one has a different locking mechanism, more sophisticated. Director Keller examined it closely. Advanced diplomatic cipher lock. These weren't standard issue, they were reserved for the most sensitive materials. Can it be open? Sarah asked. Not without the correct key sequence, Keller replied. These were designed to resist any unauthorized attempt. The wrong combination would trigger an internal destruction mechanism. After a century, Jack asked skeptically, these were engineered to maintain integrity indefinitely, Keller explained. The mechanisms were sealed in vacuum chambers with independent power sources. Sarah studied the lock, noting the distinctive pattern of the dials. If this contained the financial evidence Blackwood had gathered, the combination would need to be something he could remember, but others wouldn't guess. As they debated potential approaches, Rebecca had been reviewing the personal documents found in the first chest. Wait, there is something here. In Blackwood's journal, he repeatedly mentions a date, March 19th of 1893. His daughter's birthday, Professor Anderson recalled from his historical research. Cole Blackwood had a daughter named Elizabeth, born in 1893. According to records, she was raised by relatives after his death. Sarah examined the cipher lock again. 6 dials each with numbers 0 to 9. If we convert the date to a numeric sequence, 3/19/1893, worth attempting, Keller agreed, but we should take precautions. These mechanisms can be unstable after decades. After clearing the chamber of unnecessary personnel and establishing safety protocols, the conservator carefully turned the dials to match the sequence, 3/19/1893. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then with a soft click, followed by the release of pressurized air, the locking mechanism disengaged. Inside lay a leather-bound ledger and several bundles of financial documents, all bearing the letterhead of Chicago's Continental Bank. As the conservator carefully removed them, their significance became immediately apparent. These are account records for front companies operated by Al Capone's organization. Professor Anderson identified examining the first pages. Detailed transaction records showing money movements between legitimate businesses and bootlegging operations. Director Keller reviewed several pages with growing amazement. This is what took down Capone. Not his violence or bootlegging, but tax evasion. These records would have provided the Treasury Department with everything they needed for prosecution. But Capone wasn't prosecuted until 1931, Rebecca pointed out. Blackwood died in 1924. Because these records never reached Hoover, Keller realized. Blackwood secured them here in his cousin's barn before the ambush, planning to retrieve them when it was safe. But he never got the chance. As they continued examining the financial documents, Sarah noticed something odd: recurring references to a legacy fund with substantial deposits continuing long after Prohibition ended. This shows ongoing operations through at least 1950, she noted, well beyond the Prohibition era. And look at these beneficiary codes. They don't match the other syndicate operations. Professor Anderson studied the entries. These aren't criminal transactions. They appear to be trust fund disbursements, legitimate financial arrangements. For whom? Sarah asked. The answer came from an unexpected source. As they debated the significance of the legacy fund, Emma arrived at the barn, dropped off by a neighbor after school. The 11-year-old navigated her way through the equipment and personnel with curious excitement until she reached her mother's side. Mom, everyone at school is talking about a treasure in our barn. Is it true? Sarah introduced her daughter to the key members of the team, explaining in simplified terms the historical significance of their discovery. So our barn belonged to a famous outlaw? Emma asked, her eyes wide with excitement. Not exactly, Sarah explained. We've discovered that Cole Blackwood wasn't really an outlaw. He was a government agent working undercover. Emma studied the photographs and documents spread across the tables with the unfiltered curiosity of youth. When she reached the ledger pages showing the legacy fund, she pointed to a name that appeared repeatedly in the beneficiary codes. EBR, she read. That's like our initials, backward, Reynolds, Blackwood, Elizabeth. The room fell silent as the adults processed this observation. Sarah felt a sudden chill as connections began forming in her mind. My grandmother's name was Elizabeth, she said slowly. Elizabeth Reynolds. She never talked much about her family history, said it was complicated. Professor Anderson was already checking his historical notes. Cole Blackwood's daughter was named Elizabeth, born in 1890. After his death, she was raised by his sister in Minnesota. She would have been around 30 years old when Prohibition ended. What was your grandmother's maiden name? Director Keller asked quietly. I don't know, Sarah admitted. Family history wasn't discussed much. My mother once mentioned that grandmother had changed her name when she was young, something about a fresh start. Rebecca had been typing rapidly on her tablet. County records show that this property was owned by the Blackwood family until 1938, when it was sold to a development company. It changed hands several times before ending up at county auction this year. She looked up. Sarah, how did you hear about this auction? It wasn't widely advertised. An email from the county listings, Sarah replied. I subscribed to foreclosure notices as part of my home search. This one seemed perfect: historic property, low opening bid within my budget. Perfect timing, Jack observed. Almost as if someone wanted you to find it. Director Keller was examining the legacy fund records more carefully. These distributions follow a pattern: education expenses, home purchases, support payments during financial difficulties. The fund appears to have been established to provide for Blackwood's descendants without revealing their connection to him. Are you suggesting, Sarah said slowly, that I'm related to Cole Blackwood, that I'm the descendant of the man who owned this barn and hid this treasure? The evidence points in that direction, Professor Anderson confirmed. Elizabeth Blackwood would have been your great-grandmother if the timeline matches. The legacy fund shows disbursements to an EBR through at least 1950, by which time she would likely have had children of her own, your grandparent. Sarah struggled to process this revelation. But that would mean my purchasing this barn wasn't coincidence. Someone directed me here. The legacy fund, Director Keller noted, shows modern banking transfers as recently as 5 years ago. The fund appears to have remained active, managed by trustees, with instructions to monitor Blackwood's descendants. And when I hit financial trouble after my divorce, Sarah reasoned, they arranged for me to find this property to rediscover my family's legacy. The implications were still settling when Harold Davis entered the barn, his expression urgent. Director Keller, we have a situation. 3 vehicles just entered town. Chicago plates, known associates of the Capone Historical Foundation. They've been asking questions at the local hotel about the barn and Ms. Reynolds. Director Keller's demeanor shifted immediately from academic interest to professional alertness. How many individuals? At least 6, Davis reported, 2 with confirmed connections to organized crime families. The Capone Historical Foundation, Rebecca explained, seeing Sarah's confusion. It's supposedly a legitimate historical organization dedicated to correcting misrepresentations about Al Capone and his era. In reality, it's operated by descendants of Capone's associates who actively suppress certain aspects of Prohibition history. And they would have a particular interest in preventing financial records from becoming public, Professor Anderson added. Records that could still implicate founding families in tax evasion and money laundering crimes with no statute of limitations when fraud is involved. Sarah instinctively moved closer to Emma, her protective instincts surging. Are we in danger? Potentially, Keller confirmed. These records represent both historical evidence and potential legal liability for powerful families. The foundation has aggressively protected Capone's legacy for decades, usually through legal means, but occasionally through intimidation. I need to get Emma somewhere safe, Sarah insisted. Director Keller nodded. Agent Davis arranged secure transportation for Ms. Reynolds and her daughter. Dr. Mitchell began documenting and securing these materials for immediate transfer to Bureau custody. Wait, Sarah interjected. These artifacts belong to this property to me, apparently through family connection. I agreed to documentation, not removal. Ms. Reynolds, Keller said gravely, I understand your concerns, but we're dealing with a developing security situation. These materials need protection that we can't provide here. Jack stepped forward. There's another option. The underground chamber has remained secure for nearly a century. With modern security additions, it could serve as a temporary vault until proper arrangements can be made. We don't have time to install security systems, Davis objected. Jack smiled slightly. Former SEAL, remember I keep certain equipment in my truck for historic sites with valuable artifacts. Give me 30 minutes. As Jack left to retrieve his equipment, Ari made a decision. Emma and I will stay with Rebecca tonight away from here, but not fleeing town. Director Keller, I expect full transparency about what's happening and immediate notification of any developments. This is my property and apparently my family legacy. I won't be pushed aside in the name of national security. Keller studied her for a moment, recognizing the determination in her stance. Your NSA file mentioned your tenacity. Very well, we'll establish a secure perimeter and monitoring system. The artifacts remain on-site but under Bureau protection, and you'll receive full briefings on all findings. As they formalized this arrangement, Sarah found herself looking at the photograph of Cole Blackwood that had been found among the documents, a formal Bureau portrait showing a handsome man in his 30s, his expression serious but with intelligence burning in eyes that she now realized resembled her own. This man, this agent who had sacrificed his reputation and ultimately his life in service to his country, was her great-great-grandfather. His blood ran in her veins. His legacy had led her to this barn at precisely the moment she needed a new beginning. The mystery of how she had come to purchase this particular property at this particular time remained. But as she gathered essential belongings for their temporary relocation, Sarah felt a growing certainty that the discovery of Cole Blackwood's treasure was not the end of the story, but rather the beginning of a new chapter that would transform her understanding of both her family history and herself. What began as a desperate financial gamble had revealed itself to be something far more profound, a hidden inheritance, a legacy of service, and perhaps most valuable of all, the truth about a man history had wrongly remembered as a criminal when in fact he had been a hero. But as the sun set over Blackwood Barn, casting long shadows across the weathered timbers, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the most dangerous revelations still lay ahead. Somewhere in this town, people who had dedicated their lives to protecting Capone's legacy were preparing to ensure that certain secrets remained buried regardless of the cost. And Sarah Reynolds, former intelligence analyst and newly discovered heir to a century-old mission, was now standing directly in their path. As dusk settled over Blackwood Barn, Sarah stood on the edge of a discovery that had transformed from a desperate financial salvation into something far more profound. The history books had painted Cole Blackwood as a notorious outlaw, but the evidence spread across the makeshift conservation tables told a different story, one of sacrifice, duty, and a mission that had remained classified for nearly a century. We need to secure these materials immediately. Director Keller instructed, his demeanor shifting from academic curiosity to operational command. The Capone financial records alone represent a national security concern. I don't understand, Sarah said. These records are nearly 100 years old. How could they possibly affect national security today? Keller gestured toward the ledgers. These aren't just evidence of bootlegging, Ms. Reynolds. They document the genesis of modern organized crime's financial infrastructure, shell companies, money laundering techniques, political payoffs. And more importantly, they name names, families whose fortunes were built on prohibition crime, but who've since established themselves as legitimate business and political dynasties. The Capone Historical Foundation, Rebecca realized. It's not just about protecting Al Capone's legacy, it's about protecting the families who've spent generations hiding their origins. Precisely, Keller confirmed. The foundation is largely controlled by descendants of Capone's associates, people who've built respected family names, but whose fortunes originated in blood money. These ledgers could trigger investigations into tax evasion that has no statute of limitations when fraud is involved. The implications settled over the room. What they had discovered wasn't just historically significant, it represented a direct threat to powerful interests with resources and motivation to protect themselves. Harold Davis entered the barn, his expression grim. Director, we have movement. 3 vehicles just entered town from the Chicago direction, known associates of the foundation. They've checked into the Blackwood Inn and are asking questions about the barn. Director Keller's response was immediate. Implement security protocol Alpha. No one enters or leaves the property without bureau identification. Ms. Reynolds, I strongly recommend you and your daughter relocate temporarily until we can properly secure these materials. Sarah's protective instincts surged. Emma, she's with a neighbor now, but she'll be home soon. I'll arrange for secure transport, Keller said. Agent Davis, coordinate with local field office for additional personnel. Jack stepped forward. I can help secure the underground chamber. My restoration company has worked with high-value historical sites before. I keep specialized equipment in my truck, motion sensors, reinforced barriers, surveillance setups. Keller evaluated him with a professional's eye. Former SEAL, 8 years special operations, Jack confirmed. Security systems are standard procedure for historic sites with valuable artifacts. Nothing attracts thieves like publicity about a treasure discovery. Get your equipment, Keller authorized. Work with Agent Matthews on perimeter security. As the barn transformed into an impromptu secure facility, Sarah pulled Rebecca aside. I need you to do something for me. Take Emma to your place tonight. Don't tell her anything that would worry her. Just make it seem like a spontaneous sleepover. Of course, Rebecca agreed. But what are you going to do? Oh, stay here, Sarah replied, watching the activity around them. This is my property, apparently my family legacy. I'm not being pushed out. These people aren't just historians, Sarah, Rebecca cautioned. The Capone Foundation has connections to some dangerous individuals. And if what Keller says is true about modern families being implicated, I spent 6 years at the NSA analyzing threat patterns, Sarah reminded her. I know how to recognize danger, but I also know when something matters enough to take a calculated risk. This is my history, Rebecca, and it might be the key to understanding why I was led here in the first place. As Rebecca left to collect Emma, Sarah returned to the examination tables where Professor Anderson was carefully documenting the financial ledgers. His academic excitement was tempered by growing concern as he worked through the pages. These records are remarkably comprehensive, he observed. Blackwood wasn't just gathering evidence against Capone. He was mapping the entire financial network of Prohibition-era organized crime across the Midwest, banking connections, political payoffs, legitimate business fronts. This would have been enough to dismantle multiple criminal organizations. Sarah studied one of the ledgers, her analyst's eye catching a pattern. These entries here, they're coded differently from the rest. See how the notation system changes. Professor Anderson examined the section she indicated. You're right, these appear to be tracking something beyond standard bootlegging operations. The amounts are larger and the transaction pattern is different, more sophisticated. Director Keller joined them, examining the pages with experienced scrutiny. These aren't bootlegging records. They're documenting the establishment of what became known as the Commission, the National Crime Syndicate, that formally organized in 1929. Blackwood was witnessing its formation years earlier. So he wasn't just after Capone, Sarah reasoned. He was uncovering the creation of modern organized crime itself, which made him far more dangerous than anyone realized, Keller confirmed. No wonder they arranged the Chicago ambush. These records would have prevented the consolidation of power that shaped organized crime for the next 50 years. As they continued analyzing the documents, Jack returned with several hard-sided equipment cases. I've done an initial security assessment. The underground chamber has 3 potential access points, the main entrance we discovered, and 2 smaller emergency exits that were concealed behind debris. I can secure all 3 with motion detection and remote surveillance. Do it, Keller authorized. We'll need the chamber fully secured before we can transport these materials. The sun had completely set by the time the initial security measures were in place. The preservation team had carefully cataloged and packed the most sensitive documents for transport to secure bureau facilities, while the gold and silver remained sealed in specialized containers for on-site storage. Sarah, who had insisted on remaining involved in every aspect of the operation, noticed Dr. Mitchell examining a small leather-bound book from the first chest with particular interest. "What have you found?" Sarah asked, joining her. "I believe it's Cole Blackwood's personal journal," Dr. Mitchell replied. "Not his operational notes, but his private thoughts. The entries are remarkably human." She carefully turned the pages to an entry dated April 1923. "I saw Elizabeth today, though she doesn't know it," Sarah read aloud. "She has grown so beautiful, so much like her mother. Standing across the street while she played in the park was both the greatest woe and deepest pain I have experienced. To be so close, yet unable to acknowledge her, this is the true cost of my service, far beyond any physical danger." The words struck Sarah with unexpected force. He was watching his daughter grow up from a distance, unable to be part of her life because of his undercover role. "The ultimate sacrifice," Dr. Mitchell agreed, "not just risking his life, but surrendering his identity, being remembered as a villain when he was actually a hero." Sarah turned to another entry dated just 2 weeks before Blackwood's death. "I have made arrangements for Elizabeth's future through Joseph. The trust will provide for her education and security without revealing the connection to me. Perhaps someday, when the full story can be told, she will know that her father did not abandon her by choice, but by duty." "The legacy fund," Sarah murmured, recalling the financial entries they had discovered earlier. "He established a trust for his daughter, for Elizabeth Blackwood." Professor Anderson looked up from his work. "Elizabeth Blackwood would have been about 30 when Prohibition ended. According to our historical records, she was raised by Blackwood's sister in Minnesota after his reported death." A possibility that had been forming in Sarah's mind suddenly crystallized. "My grandmother's name was Elizabeth. She never talked about her family history, said it was complicated. She lived in Minnesota before moving east after World War II." The professor's eyes widened. "Elizabeth would be the right generation to be your great-grandmother. Do you know her maiden name?" "No," Sarah admitted. "Family history wasn't discussed much. My mother once mentioned that grandmother had changed her name when she was young, something about a fresh start." Director Keller had been listening to this exchange with growing interest. The Legacy Fund records showed disbursements to an EBR through at least 1950. If your grandmother was Elizabeth Blackwood and she married someone with the last name beginning with R. "Reynolds," Sarah supplied. "My grandfather's name was Thomas Reynolds." "Elizabeth Blackwood Reynolds," Keller said quietly. "EBR." The implication hung in the air, a personal connection to the historical discovery that went beyond mere coincidence. Rebecca entered the barn, breaking the moment of revelation. "Emma's settled at my place for the night. She thinks it's just a fun sleepover while you work with the treasure experts." Her expression grew serious as she moved closer to Sarah. "We need to talk. I've been doing some research on the auction listing for this property. It wasn't a standard county foreclosure. The previous owner donated it to a historical trust, which then allowed it to fall into disrepair until it went to auction. And here's the interesting part. The historical trust was established in 1970 by a law firm representing the Blackwood Family Preservation Fund. Someone engineered this," Sarah realized. "They arranged for me to find this property." "The timing is suspicious," Rebecca agreed. "The property became available right when you were searching for affordable housing after your divorce, and it was priced exactly within your budget." Director Keller studied Sarah with new interest. "If you are indeed Cole Blackwood's great-granddaughter, it suggests a level of continuity we hadn't considered. Operation Slingshot may have ended officially with Blackwood's death, but someone has been maintaining the legacy and waiting for the right moment to bring it full circle. The conversation was interrupted as Harold Davis hurried into the barn, his manner tense. "Director, we have a situation. Two men are approaching the property from the north perimeter, moving carefully using cover. They're armed." Keller's response was immediate. "Initiate defensive protocol. Ms. Reynolds, Mr. Harrison, move to the secure area immediately." "What about the artifacts?" Sarah asked, glancing at the partially packaged historical materials. "Security team will handle them," Keller assured her. "Your safety is the priority." As they moved toward the underground chamber, now reinforced with Jack's security equipment, Sarah noticed headlights approaching along the main road, three vehicles moving in formation, their high beams cutting through the darkness. "More company," Jack observed grimly. "Professional approach pattern, lead vehicle flankers. These aren't amateur historians." Inside the chamber, the security monitors Jack had installed showed multiple angles of the barn and surrounding property. On one screen, they could see two men in dark clothing working their way toward the barn's rear entrance, while the approaching vehicles had stopped at the main gate, disgorging several figures who moved with purposeful coordination. "They've been planning in this," Jack noted, watching the tactical deployment. "Standard infiltration pattern probe. The defenses identify weaknesses, then concentrated entry. These guys have training." On another monitor, they could see Director Keller and his agents taking defensive positions around the barn, weapons drawn, but not yet visible to the approaching intruders. "Shouldn't we call local police?" Sarah asked. "Davis already has." Keller's voice came through the communication system Jack had established. "But we're 20 minutes from response in this rural area. We need to handle the immediate situation." Through the monitors, they watched as Keller stepped onto the porch, his bureau credentials clearly visible in the security lighting. "Federal agents," his amplified voice announced. "This is a secured federal operation. Identify yourselves immediately." The approaching figures hesitated, clearly not expecting federal presence. After a brief consultation, one man stepped forward, tall, expensively dressed, with the confident bearing of authority. "Victor Moretti," Jack identified. "Grandson of Frank Moretti, one of Capone's lieutenants. Now heads the Capone Historical Foundation and several investment companies in Chicago." Moretti's voice came clearly through the exterior microphones. "Director Keller, this is an unexpected pleasure. I wasn't aware the Bureau had an interest in local historical artifacts." "Mr. Moretti," Keller acknowledged, "perhaps you can explain why your associates are attempting to infiltrate a federal operation from the rear while you approach from the front." Moretti smiled thinly. "A misunderstanding, I'm sure. My security team is understandably cautious when I travel. We're simply here to examine historical artifacts relevant to our Foundation's research." "Armed and using tactical approach patterns in the middle of the night," Keller challenged. "I suggest you recall your security team before this escalates into a federal obstruction case." For a tense moment, it seemed Moretti might press the issue. Then he raised a hand, making a subtle gesture. On the rear cameras, the two men who had been approaching the back entrance melted away into the darkness. "A simple miscommunication," Moretti insisted smoothly. "The Capone Historical Foundation has a legitimate interest in any Prohibition-era discoveries. We've been cataloging and preserving such artifacts for decades. When we heard about this remarkable find, naturally we wanted to offer our expertise." "Your offer is noted," Keller replied. "However, this site is now under federal jurisdiction pending full authentication and processing of historically significant materials. I suggest you return in the morning through official channels if you wish to discuss academic collaboration." Moretti's expression hardened slightly. "These artifacts may have connections to families we represent, Director. Historical context is important, especially when reputations are involved." "All the more reason for proper federal oversight," Keller countered. "Good evening, Mr. Moretti." With visible reluctance, Moretti and his associates returned to their vehicles. As they departed, Jack keyed the interior communication. "They'll be back. That was just a reconnaissance testing our security and response." "Agreed?" Keller's voice came through the system. "We're expediting transport for the most sensitive materials. The financial records will be moved to a secure Bureau facility within the hour." Sarah had been watching the exchange with growing understanding. The Capone Foundation isn't just worried about historical truth. They're afraid of what these records might reveal about current family fortunes. Exactly, Jack confirmed. The statute of limitations never expires on fraud. If those ledgers prove that today's legitimate businesses were built on laundered prohibition money that was never properly taxed, it could trigger investigations, civil asset forfeitures, and significant reputation damage. Keller added, joining them in the underground chamber. Which is why we need to move quickly. Moretti's retreat was tactical, not permanent. As the Bureau team prepared to transport the financial records, Sarah made a decision. Director, I'd like to review the personal journals and correspondence before they're removed. If Cole Blackwood was my great-grandfather, these represent my family history as much as national security evidence. Keller considered this request. Under the circumstances, that's reasonable, but they need to be examined in a secure environment. I can arrange for you to have supervised access at our regional office once they've been properly processed. That's not acceptable, Sarah countered firmly. These materials have been in my family's keeping for nearly a century. I won't have them disappear to a government archive without understanding their full significance. Jack intervened with a practical suggestion. What about a compromise? The financial records clearly need immediate security. But the personal materials, journals, letters, photographs, could remain here under proper protection. They're historically significant, but not immediately sensitive from a security perspective. Keller weighed this proposal. The financial ledgers and operational documents must be secured at a Bureau facility. The personal effects, he hesitated, could remain on-site provided we establish appropriate security protocols. Sarah recognized this was the best arrangement she could hope for. Agreed, but I want copies of everything that's removed in a clear timeline for when I can access the originals. As they finalized these arrangements, Rebecca entered the chamber, her expression concerned. Sarah, there is something you should see. She led them to one of the workstations where she had been analyzing the historical documentation of the property. I've been researching the chain of title for Blackwood Barn. It was owned by the Blackwood family until 1938, then sold to a corporation called Sentinel Holdings. That company maintained ownership, but allowed the property to deteriorate until it was donated to the Historical Trust in 1976. What's significant about Sentinel Holdings? Sarah asked. It was established in 1930 by J. Edgar Hoover's personal attorney, Rebecca revealed, and its board of directors included several senior Bureau officials. In essence, the FBI has controlled this property since 1938, operating through corporate proxies. Director Keller's expression confirmed the truth of this revelation. The Bureau maintains certain properties connected to sensitive historical operations. It was standard procedure during that era. This wasn't just happenstance. Sarah realized the pieces finally aligning in her mind. The Bureau has been protecting this site and what it contained for generations. But why allow it to deteriorate? Why let it go to auction now? Jack, who had been monitoring the security feeds, joined the conversation. Because they were waiting for the right person to find it. Someone with the right connection and the right skills to understand what they found. Sarah turned to Keller. You knew. When you arrived, you already knew who I was, that I'm Cole Blackwood's descendant. That's why you had my NSA file. Keller's careful neutrality slipped, revealing a hint of genuine respect. We suspected. Operation Slingshot has been a closely guarded legend within the Bureau for decades, a case study in deep cover operations that succeeded at great personal cost. Blackwood's descendants have been discreetly monitored since the 1930s, not as suspects, but as potential custodians of his legacy. My entire career, Sarah said slowly. My interest in intelligence analysis, my position at the NSA was that engineered too. No, Keller assured her. Your choices were your own. But when you purchased this property, when the right descendant finally acquired the site at precisely the moment when the historical records could safely emerge, it activated contingency protocols established long ago. By whom? Sarah pressed. Hoover's been dead for 50 years. By Cole Blackwood himself, Keller revealed. His final instructions, encoded in materials we've long possessed but couldn't fully decipher, indicated that his complete records should remain hidden until they could be entrusted to his family when the time was right and the danger had passed. This revelation struck Sarah deeply. Across nearly a century, her great-grandfather had arranged for his true legacy to find its way to her, had ensured that the truth would eventually emerge through his own bloodline. The moment was interrupted by an urgent communication from the security perimeter. Director, we have multiple vehicles approaching from both access roads. County sheriff's vehicles in the lead, but they're being followed by unmarked SUVs. Moretti's brought reinforcements, Jack observed, checking the security feeds, using local law enforcement as cover to gain access. Keller moved immediately to the communications system. All teams initiate Protocol Delta, priority materials to transport immediately. Agent Davis make contact with the sheriff's department and confirm their authorization. Sarah watched the monitors as the situation developed outside. 3 county sheriff vehicles approached the main gate, followed by black SUVs keeping a careful distance. When they reached the property entrance, a uniformed officer stepped out and approached the bureau agents maintaining the perimeter. "What's happening?" Sarah asked, unable to hear the exchange from the underground chamber. "Standard tactic," Jack explained. The Foundation likely called in a complaint trespassing suspicious activity, something that would require local response. Once law enforcement establishes a presence, they'll try to leverage it to gain access. Director Keller rejoined them, his expression confirming Jack's assessment. Moretti's filed a civil claim asserting the Foundation's historical interest in the artifacts. He's obtained an emergency court order from a local judge requiring that the materials remain in place pending a hearing. "Can he do that?" Sarah asked incredulously. "It's a delaying tactic," Keller explained. "The local court order won't ultimately supersede federal jurisdiction, but it creates a legal complication that requires response. They're trying to prevent us from removing the materials until they can find another approach. Or until they can bring in resources to take more direct action," Jack added grimly. "This is just buying time." Sarah considered their options. The financial records need to be secured immediately. They're the most sensitive and potentially damaging to the Foundation's interests. What if we divide our response, move those materials now, while addressing the court order regarding the historical artifacts? Keller nodded approvingly. "A sound approach. Agent Matthews is already preparing the financial ledgers for immediate transport through the rear access route. The local authorities are focused on the main entrance." As they implemented this strategy, Rebecca made another discovery in the property records. "Sarah, there was something else. The auction listing for this property included specific language about historic preservation priorities that would be binding on the purchaser. It was buried in the legal fine print, but essentially by purchasing the barn, you agreed to certain preservation requirements." "I remember that," Sarah confirmed. "Standard boilerplate for historic properties maintaining architectural integrity, allowing historical assessment. I didn't think much of it at the time." "It's not standard language," Rebecca corrected. "It references a 1938 covenant established when the property was first sold by the Blackwood family. That covenant grants certain federal agencies perpetual access rights for historical documentation and preservation activities, giving the Bureau legal right of entry regardless of ownership," Keller acknowledged. "Another layer of protection established to ensure these materials could be secured when needed." The revelation reinforced Sarah's growing understanding of how carefully orchestrated this entire situation had been, a decades-long operation designed to protect both physical evidence and historical truth until the proper moment for revelation. On the security monitors, they could see Bureau agents engaging with the sheriff's deputies, presenting credentials and documentation. Moretti and his associates remained in their vehicles watching the exchange with evident frustration as their legal maneuver failed to gain immediate access. "The court order grants them a hearing, not entry," Keller explained, "and federal jurisdiction takes precedence in matters involving potential evidence. We can lawfully secure the materials pending proper legal determination." While this confrontation unfolded at the main entrance, Sarah noticed movement on another monitor, a dark figure approaching the eastern perimeter where the old orchard provided natural cover. "Someone's trying to flank the property," she alerted, pointing to the screen. Jack immediately adjusted the surveillance system, enhancing the image. "Single individual moving with purpose. Not one of ours." Director Keller dispatched agents to intercept the intruder, but Sarah had already noticed something odd about the approach pattern. They're headed directly for the old well house, not the barn. How would they know about the secondary entrance to the tunnel system? Insider knowledge, Jack realized. Someone familiar with the property's original construction. The security team intercepted the figure near the well house, an elderly man who offered no resistance when confronted. To everyone's surprise, he asked specifically to speak with Blackwood's descendant. When brought to the main security perimeter, the man identified himself as Walter Jenkins, aged 87, former caretaker of the property during the 1960s and 70s. "I've been watching the property for decades," he explained when Sarah was called to speak with him. "My father worked for Joseph Blackwood, and he passed the responsibility to me. We were to maintain watch and report any unusual activity to a post office box in Washington, a duty I continued until the monitoring system was modernized in the 1990s. You were part of the protection network," Sarah realized, "keeping the secret safe." Jenkins nodded. "For 3 generations, my family has helped guard what lies beneath this barn. When I saw the foundation people arrive in town, I knew it was time to deliver what I've been keeping." From his pocket, he produced an old key attached to a faded leather tag. "This opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank in town. Inside is a letter from Cole Blackwood himself to be delivered to his descendant when the treasure was finally discovered. My grandfather received it from Joseph Blackwood before he died, with explicit instructions that it should only be presented when the time was right." Sarah accepted the key with a sense of profound connection to the past. "How did you know about me that I'm his descendant?" "The resemblance," Jenkins said simply. "You have his eyes. And the timing, we were told that when the right person found the treasure, we would know. When you bought this place and started renovation, I began watching more closely. Tonight confirmed it was time." While bureau agents escorted Jenkins to a more secure location for debriefing, Sarah made a decision. "I need to see what's in that safety deposit box, tonight." "Out of the question," Keller objected. "The security situation is still developing. We need to complete the extraction of sensitive materials before addressing secondary concerns." "This isn't secondary," Sarah insisted. "If my great-grandfather left a personal message intended specifically for this moment, it could contain critical information about what we're facing." Jack offered a practical solution. "I can escort Ms. Reynolds to the bank. My background provides adequate security, and the foundation people are focused on the barn and its contents, not on individuals." After consideration, Keller agreed to the arrangement, dispatching an agent to coordinate with the bank manager for emergency after-hours access. While preparations were made for this excursion, the bureau team successfully removed the financial ledgers and most sensitive operational documents, transporting them through the rear exit while Moretti's attention remained fixed on the main gate standoff. Under cover of darkness, Sarah and Jack slipped away from the property in his unmarked truck, taking a circuitous route into town to avoid potential surveillance. The bank manager, appropriately impressed by federal credentials, met them at a side entrance, escorting them to the vault area. The safety deposit box, when opened, contained a single envelope, yellowed with age but perfectly preserved, bearing the simple inscription, "To my descendant," in firm handwriting. With trembling fingers, Sarah broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. "To the blood of my blood," she read aloud. "If you are reading this, then the legacy I was forced to abandon has finally found its way home. What began as duty to my country became something more, a mission that required the ultimate sacrifice of identity and honor. I write this knowing I may soon fall in the line of duty, my name forever stained with the false reputation of criminality." Sarah paused, emotion catching in her throat before continuing. "The treasure you have found is more than gold and silver. It is truth, a truth powerful enough that men have killed to keep it hidden. The financial records I secured from Capone's organization document not merely bootlegging, but the creation of a shadow economy that has infected legitimate business and government. The names contained therein are not merely historical curiosities, but the foundation of dynasties built on blood money that continues to corrupt our nation's institutions." Jack listened intently as Sarah continued reading. "I have arranged for these records to remain hidden until they can be entrusted to one who shares my blood, and I hope my commitment to justice. The bureau I served may have changed in the decades since my death, but the oath I took remains sacred, to protect this nation from enemies, both foreign and domestic. There is one final secret contained in the underground chamber, one not recorded in any official document. Beneath the stone bearing the mark of the eagle in the eastern wall lies a separate cache. It contains evidence I could not entrust even to Hoover himself, proof of corruption reaching into the highest offices of government. Only when this evidence reaches the light of day can my mission be truly complete. To you who bears my name and blood, I entrust this final duty. The path will not be without danger for the descendants of those I fought, still hold power and influence. But the truth must prevail, no matter the cost. With faith in your courage, Cole Blackwood, Special Agent, Bureau of Investigation. The letter's implications hung in the air between them. Somewhere in the chamber they had just left was evidence even more sensitive than what they had already discovered, information Cole Blackwood had deemed too explosive to share with anyone, even his bureau superiors. "We need to get back to the barn," Sarah said urgently, "before anyone else finds what he hid." They returned to discover the standoff had evolved. Moretti had produced additional legal documentation, a historical claim filed by the Foundation asserting ownership rights to any artifacts connected to Capone-era Chicago. The local sheriff, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating jurisdictional conflict, was attempting to mediate between bureau agents and Moretti's legal representatives. Sarah and Jack slipped past this confrontation, returning to the underground chamber where Director Keller was supervising the final documentation of artifacts before transport. "Director," Sarah called, approaching urgently, "there's something else hidden here, something Cole Blackwood concealed separately from the main cache. We need to find the stone marked with an eagle on the eastern wall." Keller's expression showed immediate understanding of the implications. Matthews Phillips examined the eastern wall section. "Look for any stonework with an eagle marking." The search proceeded methodically until one of the agents called out, "Here, carved into this cornerstone, it's weathered, but the eagle design is still visible." With careful precision, they examined the stone, discovering it was not mortared in place like the others, but fitted precisely to appear seamless. When properly leveraged, it slid inward, revealing a small cavity containing a metal cylinder of military-grade construction. "Field document transport tube," Keller identified. World War I officers' equipment designed to protect critical maps and orders during combat conditions. When opened, the cylinder contained several folded documents in a small leather pouch. The documents, when carefully unfolded, revealed themselves to be letters on official government stationery correspondence between high-ranking officials discussing containment strategies for the growing organized crime problem in the early 1920s. "These aren't enforcement plans," Keller noted as he reviewed the content. "They're discussing accommodation formal arrangements to allow certain bootlegging operations to continue in exchange for political support and financial contributions." Legalized corruption, Sarah realized. Government officials essentially licensing certain criminal organizations while prosecuting others. "And the signatures," Keller added grimly. "Cabinet-level officials, federal judges, senators, a network of corruption reaching into every branch of government." The leather pouch contained photographs documenting clandestine meetings between government officials and known crime figures, visual evidence supporting the written correspondence. "This would have been politically devastating if released in the 1920s, Professor Anderson observed. "It would have undermined public confidence in the entire federal government during a critical period." And Blackwood couldn't entrust it even to Hoover, Sarah concluded, because Hoover himself was building his power base within this same compromise system. "So he preserved it," Jack said, "and arranged for it to emerge when it could finally be addressed without destroying the institutions he was trying to protect." The discovery of this final cache elevated the significance of Cole Blackwood's mission beyond a simple law enforcement operation. He had uncovered systemic corruption at the highest levels of government, a cancer at the heart of American democracy that had been allowed to metastasize through the decades precisely because the evidence had remained hidden. As they carefully documented this new evidence, the confrontation outside reached a resolution. Moretti and his associates had been forced to retreat when state-level bureau officials arrived with federal warrants specifically naming the Foundation as the subject of an ongoing investigation into historical artifact tampering and obstruction of justice. By dawn, the most sensitive materials had been secured for transport to Bureau headquarters, while the historical artifacts, the gold and silver period photographs, and personal effects remained under guard at the property, pending formal determination of their status. Sarah, exhausted but unwilling to leave until the situation was resolved, found herself sitting on the barn's front steps as the first light of morning painted the weathered timbers with golden warmth. Jack joined her, offering a cup of coffee from the thermos he had retrieved from his truck. "Quite a night," he observed, settling beside her. "My grandfather used to say that history isn't what happened, but what we choose to remember about what happened," Sarah replied, watching the sunrise. Cole Blackwood chose to be remembered as a criminal so that his work could continue. He sacrificed not just his life, but his legacy. Until now, Jack noted. Now you have the opportunity to restore his true place in history. Director Keller approached from the barn where the final security arrangements were being implemented. Mr. Reynolds, I owe you an explanation. The Bureau has maintained awareness of Blackwood's descendants for generations, not to monitor them, but to protect them. The organizations he infiltrated had long memories and resources to match. Keeping his family connection obscured was as much about security as secrecy. But you arranged for me to find this place, Sarah said. After all these years, someone decided it was time for the truth to emerge. Not someone, Keller corrected. Something. The Foundation's growing influence in recent years has raised concerns about historical revisionism, powerful interests actively working to rewrite the Prohibition-era narrative to legitimize fortunes built on blood money. When your financial situation made you vulnerable after your divorce, it created the perfect opportunity to bring Blackwood's legacy full circle to place his evidence in the hands of his own descendant, someone with both the personal stake and professional skills to ensure the truth emerged properly. So what happens now, Sarah asked. To the evidence to this property, to the truth about Cole Blackwood. That's partially up to you, Keller replied. The financial records and evidence of governmental corruption will require careful handling through appropriate legal channels. Some of it remains relevant to ongoing investigations into organized crime's evolution. But the historical narrative, Cole Blackwood's true legacy as an American hero rather than an outlaw, that can begin immediately. The Blackwood Center for Prohibition History. Sarah said, an idea forming. This property, restored as both a historical site and research facility dedicated to telling the true story of law enforcement's battle against organized crime, including the sacrifices made by agents like Cole Blackwood. The Bureau would support such an initiative, Keller confirmed. The historical preservation grants Dr. Mitchell mentioned earlier could be expedited. Your background in intelligence analysis makes you uniquely qualified to serve as its director. Jack nodded approvingly. The structural assessment I started yesterday confirms the barn can be fully restored. The underground chamber could become the centerpiece exhibit, preserved exactly as Blackwood left it. As they discussed these possibilities, Rebecca arrived with Emma, who raced from the car to embrace her mother. Mom, everyone at school is talking about treasure in our barn. Is it true, or are we rich now? Sarah hugged her daughter tightly. We've found something more valuable than money, sweetheart. We've discovered our family history, a legacy of service and sacrifice that's been waiting for us to uncover it. Emma's eyes widened with excitement. So we're staying. We get to keep the barn. Not just keep it, Sarah assured her. We're going to restore it, make it into something special that honors a very brave man, your great-great-grandfather. As Emma processed this revelation, her expression grew serious with the natural wisdom of childhood. Is that why you bought this place? Because somehow you knew? Sarah exchanged glances with Director Keller before answering truthfully. I think part of me might have. Sometimes our choices are guided by things we don't fully understand, connections that run deeper than we realize. Over the following months, the Blackwood Center for Prohibition History took shape as the barn underwent careful restoration. The gold and silver, officially authenticated as federal property, temporarily appropriated for Operation Slingshot, were returned to government custody but loaned back to the center as the centerpiece of its historical exhibits. The financial records Cole Blackwood had secured proved as significant as Director Keller had suggested. Modern forensic accounting techniques applied to the century-old ledgers revealed money trails connecting several prominent American fortunes directly to Prohibition-era bootlegging operations. The evidence triggered multiple federal investigations, asset forfeitures, and a fundamental reassessment of certain respectable family dynasties. The Capone Historical Foundation, its leadership implicated in attempts to suppress historical evidence and obstruct federal investigations, saw its influence collapse. As sponsors withdrew support and regulatory scrutiny intensified. Victor Moretti himself faced federal charges related to evidence tampering and attempted theft of historical artifacts. For Sarah Reynolds, the transformation was both professional and deeply personal. The desperate financial circumstances that had driven her to purchase a dilapidated barn with her last resources had led to a new beginning she could never have imagined. Director of a nationally significant historical center, guardian of her great-grandfather's true legacy and connector of past to present in ways that brought healing to both. On the day of the center's official opening, a special exhibit titled The Hero History Forgot was unveiled, chronicling Cole Blackwood's extraordinary service and sacrifice. Among the attendees were Director Keller, Professor Anderson, and Dr. Mitchell, along with senior bureau officials and historians from across the country. Sarah, standing before the renovated barn that now housed both her home and a national historical treasure, delivered remarks that bridged the century between Cole Blackwood's sacrifice and its final recognition. History is written not just in textbooks, but in the choices of individuals who place duty above self-interest, truth above convenience, and service above recognition, she told the assembled crowd. Cole Blackwood allowed himself to be remembered as an outlaw so that his work could continue undetected. He sacrificed not just his life, but his very legacy in service to his country. She gestured toward the barn behind her, its weathered timbers now carefully restored, its historical significance preserved for future generations. Today, we correct that historical injustice. We recognize that sometimes our greatest heroes operate in shadows, their contributions known only to a few. And we acknowledge that truth, though it may be buried for a time, eventually finds its way to the light. As the ribbon was cut and visitors began exploring the exhibits chronicling America's battle against organized crime during the Prohibition era, Sarah found a quiet moment with Emma beside the glass case containing Cole Blackwood's Bureau of Investigation credentials, finally displayed with the honor they deserved. "Do you think he would be proud?" Emma asked, studying the photograph of her great-great-grandfather in his bureau uniform before he assumed his undercover identity. Sarah considered the journey that had brought them to this moment, the seeming financial disaster that had led to discovery, the revelation of a legacy hidden for generations, and the ultimate vindication of a man history had wrongly remembered. "I think," she said finally, "he knew this day would come. He believed enough in justice and in his family to ensure that the truth would eventually emerge. That kind of faith across generations. Yes, I think he would be very proud." As visitors moved through the center, engaging with exhibits that revealed the true story behind one of American history's most misunderstood figures, Sarah Reynolds found herself standing in the carefully preserved underground chamber where it had all begun. The space that had hidden truth for nearly a century now illuminated it for all to see, a testament to one man's extraordinary sacrifice and the granddaughter who had finally brought his true legacy into the light. The failing barn that had once represented her last desperate financial hope had revealed itself to be something far more valuable, a physical connection to a pivotal moment in history, a bridge between past and future, and the foundation for a legacy of truth and service that would extend far beyond her own lifetime. In that moment of quiet reflection, surrounded by the echoes of history, finally speaking its truth, Sarah understood that some treasures transcend gold and silver. The true inheritance Cole Blackwood had left was not the physical wealth in those weathered chests, but the example of his courage, his duty, and his unwavering commitment to justice values that had somehow found their way through the generations to shape her own choices and character. And in that realization lay perhaps the most valuable discovery of all, that across the span of a century, from the chaos of Prohibition to the challenges of modern America, the thread of integrity remained unbroken, connecting past to present and illuminating the path toward a future where truth, however long concealed, would finally prevail. 1 year after the discovery that shook both Blackwood County and the corridors of power in Washington, the Blackwood Center for Prohibition History stood as a testament to truth finally coming to light. The weathered barn, once on the verge of collapse, had been meticulously restored. Its timber frame reinforced, its historical features preserved, in its secret chamber transformed into the centerpiece of a nationally recognized exhibition. Sarah Reynolds, now officially the center's executive director, stood before the gathered crowd at the anniversary celebration. Among the attendees were Director Keller, Professor Anderson, Jack Harrison, whose restoration company had overseen the building's rebirth, and most importantly, Emma, who had embraced her family's complex legacy with the straightforward wisdom of youth. "A year ago, I stood in this barn as a desperate single mother with nothing but foreclosure notices and fading hope. Today we gather to commemorate not just a personal journey, but a historical correction long overdue. Cole Blackwood sacrificed everything: his reputation, his family connections, ultimately his life, to serve his country in ways that could never be acknowledged during his lifetime. The truth about Operation Slingshot has required us to reconsider what we thought we knew about that turbulent period in American history. The Bureau of Investigation, while pioneering new approaches to law enforcement, made decisions that protected institutions at the cost of individual recognition. They chose to let a hero be remembered as a criminal because the times demanded such sacrifice. The documents discovered here have indeed had far-reaching consequences. Three major financial institutions have faced federal investigations for their origins in laundered prohibition money. Seven respectable family dynasties have been forced to acknowledge their foundations in organized crime. The Capone Historical Foundation has been dissolved following federal indictments. Yet amid these necessary reckonings, we must remember that our nation has always found its way forward through the courage of individuals willing to place duty above self-interest. Cole Blackwood was such a man. He understood that sometimes protecting America meant working in shadows, accepting that his true contribution might never be known in his lifetime. The Eagle Stone marker we discovered bears an inscription too weathered to be seen at first glance. When properly restored, it revealed these words, "Not for glory, but for country." This simple statement encapsulates the quiet patriotism that has sustained our nation through its darkest hours, the willingness of ordinary citizens to do extraordinary things without expectation of recognition or reward. This center stands as more than a museum. It is a reminder that history is not a simple narrative of heroes and villains, but a complex tapestry of human choices made under difficult circumstances. The Bureau made mistakes in how it handled Blackwood's legacy, mistakes that Director Keller has formally acknowledged in the official record. Yet those institutional failings do not diminish the personal sacrifice of the agents who served. As we move forward, the Blackwood Center will continue its dual mission, preserving the authentic history of law enforcement during Prohibition while providing educational programs that examine the complex ethical questions raised by undercover operations. Next month, we'll welcome our first class of law enforcement ethics students who will study the Blackwood case as both a historical milestone and a continuing challenge. The financial proceeds from the gold and silver officially determined to be federal property temporarily appropriated for Operation Slingshot have been designated for a scholarship fund supporting the children of federal agents killed in the line of duty. This seems a fitting tribute to a man who gave everything, including his relationship with his own daughter, in service to his country. Cole Blackwood never lived to see his name cleared, but through the strange workings of time and circumstance, justice has finally found its way home. Not perfect justice that rarely exists outside of storybooks, but the hard-won justice of truth, finally acknowledged, of service, finally honored. In the ledger of history, some debts can never be fully repaid, but today we balance the account a little more fairly. We remember Cole Blackwood not as the outlaw of legend, but as he truly was a patriot who knew that sometimes loving your country means allowing yourself to be misunderstood by it. Thank you all for being part of this journey. The truth, though long delayed, has finally prevailed. As visitors explored the exhibits chronicling America's complex battle against organized crime during the Prohibition era, Sarah stood beside the glass case containing Cole Blackwood's Bureau of Investigation credentials, finally displayed with the honor they deserved. The journey from financial desperation to historical vindication had been unexpected and challenging, but in that moment, surrounded by the tangible evidence of her great-grandfather's sacrifice and service, she understood that some legacies transcend mere survival. They remind us that our greatest strength lies not in power or wealth, but in the quiet courage to do what's right, even when recognition may never come in our lifetime.